All right, so all to the afternoon session of the September 26th Board of County Commissioners regular meeting. Good afternoon, Ms. Smolker-Heiske.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Great, thank you.
We have a good agenda this afternoon. The first item is we have two items in one. We have a Lane County ordinance, first reading, setting the second reading, and a Springfield ordinance setting a second reading. Is that the correct assessment?
They'd both be Lane County ordinances
Both
for
are.
the same project.
Both of the same project, but with, and we need to pass these as two separate motions.
Correct.
Correct, okay.
One motion to approve two would probably suffice.
Would suffice in this situation. Okay, then Vice Chair, you heard that.
I like efficiency.
I love it. That you just saved half of our afternoon. Thank you. So then I'll read this. It's item 10A, first reading and setting of the second reading and joint public hearing on ordinance number 2307 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 10.600-15 to reflect amendments to the Springfield Development Code relating to the Springfield Comprehensive Plan map and land use element, adopting a savings and severability clause and providing an effective date. Lane County File Number 509, PA 23-05369. And first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance number PA 1390 in the matter of amending the Eugene Springfield Metropolitan Area General Plan, Metro Plan, and Springfield Comprehensive Plan to adopt the Springfield Comprehensive Plan map and land use element, amending the Gateway Refinement Plan and Glenwood Refinement Plan, adopting a savings and severability clause and providing an effective date. Lane County File Number 509, PA 23-05369. And the second reading and public hearing, we'll hear more on this, but will be scheduled for, should the motions pass, for a joint meeting with the City of Springfield on October 16th at 6:00 p.m. And that'll be a time certain at a place that will be announced. Very good. With that, I'll look to the staff for a report. And Ms. Smolker-Heiske, I'll take a moment to introduce Jared Bowder, who's our senior planner, who's a senior planner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Farr. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, I'm Jared Bowder, the County Planner and Project Manager for the City of Springfield Comprehensive Plan Map Clarification Project, as we're calling it. As was just read in by Chair Farr, this is a first reading for ordinance numbers 2307 and PA 1390, Land Management Division File 509, PA 23-05369. Ordinance number PA 1390 includes amendments to the Metro Plan, Springfield Comprehensive Plan, and the Gateway and Glenwood Neighborhood Refinement Plans, while Ordinance 2307 amends Lane Code Chapter 10 to incorporate the proposed amendments to the Springfield Development Code. This project was initiated by the City of Springfield in order to continue the development of the Springfield Comprehensive Plan. We're now at a key step in that process, which is to create a Springfield Comprehensive Plan map that clarifies the boundaries of the plan designations on the Metro Plan diagram at a property-specific level. The proposed amendments require co-adoption by Lane County and Springfield as they apply to urbanizable lands within the Springfield's urban growth boundary. There's additional neighborhood refinement plans that are wholly within the city limits, which do not require county adoption. And the item before you today is also a request that the board set a second reading and public hearing for October 16th, 2023, time certain at 7 p.m. That's a joint meeting with the Springfield City Council to be held at Springfield City Hall. The actual meeting room is yet to be announced. And at that time, on October 16th, staff will provide a more comprehensive staff report on the project, and there will be an opportunity for public comment. There's a work session presentation at 6 p.m. in advance of the 7 p.m. public hearing. And with that, I'll include the staff presentation for the first reading. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Bowder. So a clarification, 6 o'clock work session with a 7 o'clock ordinance
Correct.
procedure. Excellent. And we will pass both of these line items in a single motion when the time comes.
Unless there's changes.
Unless there are changes. And to the board, this is an ordinance. This is the first reading, as we all know, which requires a second reading in at least 14 days from this point in time with the public hearing. Discussion from the board. Questions for Mr. Bowder? I'm looking online to Commissioner Buck, and I see no questions, Mr. Bowder, so I believe, Vice Chair, we're ready for a motion.
I get this right.
So we're just going to do both of these together?
Yeah.
Great. I will do a truncated version since you read the entirety. I will move approval of this first reading and set second reading and joint public hearing for ordinance number 23-07 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 10.600-15, et cetera, and the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance PA 1390 in the matter of amending the Eugene Springfield Metro Plan and Springfield Comprehensive Plan, et cetera.
Second?
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Lovall. We have ordinance 2307 and PA 1390.
Chair Farr,
Ms. Jones.
if I may amend the motion or ask the motioner to amend
Yes.
setting the second reading on October 16th
Yep.
with a work session at 6 p.m. and a public hearing at 7 p.m.
Thank you. Yes, as amended. I didn't scroll far enough on my screen. Yes. The motion stands as initially stated to approve those two, the first reading, setting the second, and those two ordinances, and setting the public hearing for ordinance 23-07 and PA 1309 with a joint meeting with the Springfield City Council on October 16, work session at 6 p.m. and a 7 p.m. time certain for our action.
And I'll look for concurrence from the seconder of the motion.
Yes, a second.
So moved and amended. No discussion to the motion. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Browder.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.
We owe you at least 15 minutes. So,
We'll make up for it on the 16th.
If I had read all of that in its entirety, I could have used that 15 minutes up, I think.
Then moving down our agenda, Ms. Markreis, we're on to item 10B, which is discussion and action in the matter of selecting a consultant to assess barriers to affordable housing in Lane County. Boy, I want to meet this consultant. Ms. Markreis.
Thank you, Chair. This is a return item from a board-initiated assignment. And so staff has worked with two commissioners, Commissioner Seneca and Commissioner Buck, throughout in designing both the language for the request for proposal that was conducted, as well as in the review and evaluation of the proposals. We've had a rather, I'd say, lengthy process in to conduct this request for proposals, and I think I'll just turn it over to Dan Hurley, our Public Works Director, and Keir Miller, our Land Management Division Manager, to walk you through what that process looks like, what the results are, and then we're really here to answer any questions from the board and ask for your direction and approval of a contract with one of the responding firms. So, Dan, you want to take it?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So this is a board assignment that's been hanging out there for a while. It was initiated in February at the request of Commissioner Seneca and Commissioner Buck. And the assignment was to solicit for a consultant to conduct a comprehensive review on barriers to housing that are within the jurisdiction and control of Lane County. The concerns raised by the board included a lack of affordable housing, a lack of inventory, and the difficulty, cost, and time it takes to obtain approvals and permits under Lane County's jurisdiction. The board wanted to evaluate to determine if Lane County is doing everything legally possible to assist in increasing the stock of affordable housing in rural Lane County. So Commissioner Seneca and Commissioner Buck agreed to help us to draft a scope of work. We met in March and again in May to develop a scope of work, which started out quite lengthy, and the desire was to shorten that scope of work and maybe do it in 2 phases. So we went forward with a limited scope of work that included 6 items, and those items were to conduct a literature review of background reference studies related to the barriers to affordable housing, to evaluate land use impediments at the state and county level, to evaluate building code impediments at the state and county level, to review processes at Lane County's Land Management Division and in Lane Code, to answer questions related to improving the speed, delivery of permitting, reducing costs, and looking at priorities for making the changes recommended. To review the current staffing and structure of Lane County's Land Management Division, and then to present findings to the Board of County Commissioners. So we issued an RFQ. We received 3 proposals back. The group that was reviewing this, that included the 2 commissioners and staff, decided to reissue the RFQ to see if we would get more proposals. We ultimately got 5 proposals back, ranging from $29,320 to $249,454. So quite a range in there. We evaluated the proposals, and the staff recommendation would be to award to the lowest qualified proposer, which would be Morant McLeod. But the board assignment was to return back to the board to get input and direction before making a decision. Normally, if it was under 50,000, I could execute the contract. If it's up to 150,000, the county administrator could execute. But depending on which proposal the board selects, and the board can select other than the lowest bid proposal based on the best interests of the county. And the board may want to consider dividing up the scope of work between the consultants. I've included the proposals from each of the consulting firms, and at this point, we're just looking for direction from you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hurley. Anything to add, Mr. Miller?
No, not at this time.
Very good. Then I'll open to the board for discussions. Just a quick correction. You said you recommend that we award to the lowest qualified respondent.
And we deemed the lowest,
Qualified, the lowest qualified, okay, not the lowest qualified, but the lowest qualified. Okay,
sorry. Thank you for correcting me.
good, okay, thank you. Then I'll look to the board for discussion. Commissioner Lovell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to make a couple of notes. Thanks for bringing this to us finally. It's been a long time coming. I know you've had a lot of hard work on it, so I just appreciate all the staff time and effort that went into it. I want to make a couple of points for the public so that they're really clear. You had some points. I want to add some to those. This audit is 2 parts. This part is half of the review is to review the code challenges to allow more rural housing is part of the focus. And the other half is to examine land management division practices, permitting processes, culture, and customer service. I think that's some of the areas that we're also looking at these in 2 parts. The How and Man proposals that I read in your packet, there are 2 individuals who have worked for Lane County rewriting code. And Kent Howe specifically was in charge of this very department for 17 years, so I want to make sure the public knows that. Going into it, some of my decisions about this, I want to pick the most expert people I can who can get to the source of the problem and the focus of the problems quickly, and I think these guys have my attention. I think this proposal, if we choose those 2 people, this proposal will in the end be less costly to the overall fact that these individuals know the ins and outs of the department, but will also potentially save the department and the Lane County tens of thousands of dollars because they can help rewrite the code that we want corrected going forward. So I think we'd save that process, though that process would happen more quickly, and I think ultimately in a more effective manner. So if I may, I'd like to move that we direct the county administrator to hire the consultants of Ken Howe and Jim Mann to conduct a comprehensive review of the systems and processes within the jurisdiction and control of Lane County to gain an understanding of what Lane County government can do to increase the availability and affordability of housing in Lane County. Thank you, Chair.
And before I look for a second, Commissioner, I'll ask this. We've not had a chance to have a first round of discussion before the motion. Any subsequent, if we do receive a second to this motion, then any discussion would be to the motion and not to the proposals. So with that, is there a second to the motion?
I'll second the motion and continue discussion.
Okay, then we have moved by Commissioner Lovell and seconded by Commissioner Senega, and that is that the third proposal in the chart, which is Kent Howe and Jim Mann, that we accept the $60,000 proposal. So subsequent discussion to the motion, then I will open discussion to the motion, and I'll look to online first to Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to be able to support this particular motion. Specifically, all commissioners and the public should be aware that we had thorough discussions in our subgroup regarding all the applicants that submitted in the first and the second round. The Kent and Howe submission, specifically, my major concern is that of the pair, they've never worked together. They didn't show any past history of doing this kind of work together. One of them also has an active application with the county And for me, that is a red flag and a huge conflict of interest. We are trying to get a third party outside vendor to come in and really authentically analyze the affordable housing items that are listed in the RFQ. I think if we were to proceed with this particular entity, the problem is having an active developer as the consultant who has an application submitted with the county would cast a great shadow on the real true work that we're trying to accomplish here. I don't know if we have Council Rebecca Dorman online or in the audience with us, but this is an issue that I think needs vetting before we proceed. We had 5 folks in our subcommittee. 4 of them were interested in moving with the Morant McLeod RFQ, and 1 did not. And it's because we weren't unanimous. We are here in front of the full board for a thorough discussion, which we're not having because we already have a motion on table, which feels like it's being really forced through without having a full conversation regarding the pros and cons of the various submissions that we receive from different companies. For all of those reasons, I will not support this. I still very much believe in the original concept of what we want to do here, but I can't support this particular motion. A conflict of interest is too great, and I would rather the chair ask for a more thorough conversation before we just barrel through with some folks that haven't clarified the conflict of interest and are double the amount of another very qualified applicant. And we don't need to waste taxpayer dollars if they can do and accomplish what we're asking for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. And the process, we did receive a motion and a second, so we're moving forward with the parliamentary process. Vice Chair Trieger.
Commissioner Seneca has his hand up. I do not.
I thought I saw you move your hand. Okay. Then Commissioner Seneca.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Director Hurley. I mean, we did work hard on this. But and maybe Mr. Mokrowski, but we ran this by Council Cheney, right? And he came up with there's no.
I can speak to that, Commissioner. Yes, we did. And I have an email from him. I'll read the section that's pertinent. It says, rather than reject the proposal, it would be reasonable for us to seek assurances that what the contractor might learn about land management practices and procedures will not be used in any way to either influence policy recommendations that might result in a way that would benefit the contractor or be otherwise benefit the contractor and its dealings with the county in the future. That request for reassurances could include asking how that would be accomplished.
Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to make sure. I thought I'd read that. To me, it's pretty simple. I mean, these guys are very qualified. They want to help. We're in Lane County. They've got background in Lane County. We've talked about how difficult Lane County is to work in. Rather than trying to get someone else up to speed, I think these guys are here and there, and sometimes you pay for what you get.
Thank you, Commissioner Seneca. Further discussion? Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Like Commissioner Buck, I'm really disappointed that we didn't have an opportunity to just have a conversation about this agenda item more broadly and more fully before responding to a particular motion. But since there is a motion on the table, I will respond to it. I will not support this motion for some of the reasons Commissioner Buck stated. Also because we issued an RFQ, not an RFP. It is standard practice to go with the lowest cost. Not only is there someone with a lower cost who has experience in exactly this kind of work, but would bring fresh eyes, which I think is what's needed here, and who provided previous project examples, which the folks with the motion on the table did not. Not only are they not the least expensive, they're not even the next least expensive. The the least expensive quote provided three-step options, and I believe staff is recommending the mid-range of those three. And then there was another consultant in between these two firms. So we have a lot of options before us that are cost-effective, that are folks that took the RFQ seriously and didn't make assumptions about their ability to be awarded this contract, and actually went ahead and delivered a proposal that demonstrated their experience in exactly this area. So I have other questions, but they're not to the motion. So to the motion, I will not be supporting it because I do not believe they are necessarily either the most cost-effective, nor have they demonstrated they're the best firm to do what we're asking.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trigger. Further discussion? A couple of questions. The letter that you read was from Mr. Cheney, who was no longer with our council office. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
What was the date on that letter?
The date was August 21st. When
August
he was still employed
21st.
with Bethany.
Okay. And where did that letter coincide with the process that brought forward these recommendations?
It came after our last discussion as a group when it was brought to light that the applicant with a potential conflict of interest had a current application in with.
And very good. And I see nobody from County Council with us at this point in time, unless someone is online. No County Council with us at this point in time for further clarifications on that. So we'll take Mr. Cheney's letter as the input from County Council. Okay, and Commissioner Seneca, you asked, can you repeat the question that you asked after hearing the letter from Mr. Cheney regarding how, or regarding how will they demonstrate no conflict of interest?
I believe Mr. Hurley said that, right?
I could read that again.
Please do.
So rather than reject the proposal, it would be reasonable for us to seek assurances that what the contractor might learn about land management practices and procedures will not be used in any way to either A, influence policy recommendations that might result in a way that would benefit the contractor, or B, otherwise provide a benefit to the contractor in its dealings with the county in the future. That request for reassurances could include asking how that would be accomplished. So it wasn't specified how that would be accomplished, but we would need to ask the contractor how they could demonstrate that.
Okay. Well, I certainly wish Mr. Cheney were here to answer some questions that I have for council regarding that letter. But we don't have council with us right now. So I'm...
Try to get council here. Rebecca Dorman might be available. She's familiar with...
I've messaged council's office to see if she's available, and Commissioner Buck does have her hand up, Chair.
Okay, well, I'll continue. You know, regarding the qualifications, I agree that the agency mentioned in the motion does have the qualification based upon a long history on both parts of the principals in working in Lane County. They have information that would have to be provided to an outside source that was coming in to do the work for us. So I'll look for further discussion. Yeah, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I did read what Council Cheney wrote at the time. I think the issue is we didn't have a chance to discuss legally what those assurances would even look like. Would they need to sign some kind of legal document? I mean, how do you assure that what information you're providing or counsel you're providing to the government is not going to impact your business in a positive way? Obviously, we want some directive that comes from this result of the report, and hopefully we can act on those. But if we know that some of those suggestions are going to influence the actual consultant's business, and there's that potential hanging out in any way, shape, or form, that's the cloud that I referred to earlier. And it will make me doubt what's written in a final report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I see that Ms. Dornan has joined us. Have you read, please join us at Ms. Mokrycki, with your permission, ask Ms. Dornan to join the panel. Thank you. And I don't know if I need your permission, but I asked it anyway. Okay. All right, but thanks for your permission, and thank you for joining us. You have heard or you've seen the letter provided by Mr. Cheney. I think some of the questions are surrounding that, and the one question is, how do we, could you read that paragraph out loud again, Mr. Director Hurley?
Sure. Yes, Chair. So rather than reject that proposal, it would be reasonable for us to seek assurances that what the contractor might learn about land management practices and procedures will not be used in any way to either A, influence policy recommendations that might result in a way that would benefit the contractor, or B, otherwise provide a benefit to the contractor in its dealings with the county in the future. Okay. That request for reassurances could include asking how that would be accomplished.
Okay. And then what I'd ask for you, Ms. Dornan, is how would we get that assurance? I mean, what would be a satisfactory assurance?
Well, thank you for asking that question, Chair. I did look at this question with Commissioner Buck a little bit, and I think that something that could help clear up any potential future conflict of interest or ethical issue might be to ask the proposer, Mr. Mann, to clarify his status in the proposal. It states that he's retired, but our records indicate that we have some pending land use applications that he's working on. So we could ask for some kind of clarification on that point. And then also to ask Mr. Mann if he has any, or Mr. Howe, if they have any ideas on how they could prevent use of the information that they provide to the county or information that they receive while providing this service to the government from becoming a financial opportunity for them in the future. And that might be a memo, a letter, to just explain their point of view on that issue.
Okay.
And then ultimately, if this is a stumbling point, and this is the direction the board wants to move forward in, another way to move forward would be to ask for an opinion from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. They do give advisory opinions if that would be needed to help clear the road if this is the direction that the board chooses to go in.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Dornan. Then I have a couple of further questions. I'm the third vote on this, right? Or I'm not the third vote on this. And on any subsequent motion, I am the third vote. I'm not the third vote, I would guess. So I have some very serious questions about this. In looking at the respondents, the one that's in the motion, the respondent in the motion seems to be the most qualified to do the work. I want an accurate representation of what is an assessment of barriers to affordable housing in Lane County. And I believe that people who have been working here are the ones that can most easily either provide that information, access that information, or research that information. I believe strongly that this is the best qualified applicant. However, I do have a question regarding Mr. Cheney's letter, regarding getting assurances from the respondent that they can in fact do this work without having it interfere with whatever their side work. And I'm not familiar with their side work at all. Zero familiarity with what land use applications that may be outstanding. Sounds like other commissioners may be, maybe Commissioner Buck is, I don't know. But that being said, I'm not prepared to give the third vote on this at this point in time, and I'm not prepared to give the third vote on any motion at this point in time. which means that we're going to be at an impasse. We'll fail any motion that happens, and we won't have a consultant at the end of the day today unless we do another step, and that is request the reassurance that Mr. Cheney has recommended that we get from the applicant, from the respondent, and consider that before we make this final decision as to who the consultant is going to be. So with that being said, open it to the board or to Mr. Director Hurley or Ms. Doran.
I don't think I have anything to add, Chair.
Okay.
We can move through those steps and bring this back for discussion.
Okay. Then I'll look to the maker of the motion. You may not have a passed motion based upon incomplete information at this point in time. Would you like to withdraw the motion and ask for further information before we move forward? You don't have to.
I think I'd like to add a statement before I decide what to do with that. I think that the word developer is probably the second worst word from lawyer as far as reputation. Everybody seems to think that a developer who goes into a situation or is in a conflict with the permit office is ultimately the bad guy trying to screw the government. And I would just like to say that I think if this, Mr. Howe and Mr. Mann, if they've got active goings-ons with the county, their purpose is not to give self-interest a boost.
Point of order, Chair.
Their interest is
To the motion.
I believe this is to the motion. Continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is an effort to raise the tide of all boats. So I think rather than just assume these people are out for personal gain, I think is premature. So I would like to stay with the motion if I could, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so we have before us a motion. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Seneca?
Hey, Ms. Doran. It sounds like this isn't a complicated thing if we go through with this. Am I reading that correctly? You said a memo or a letter, a letter of understanding, memorandum.
Yes, and if I may, Chair, may I elaborate a little bit on
Please.
some of the things I found when I was looking at this? As far as the ethics statutes, there's a difference between, there's an ethics opinion by the Attorney General's office that distinguishes between providing services on behalf of the government and providing services to the government. And this RFQ kind of falls a little bit in a gray area because the comprehensive look at what we can do to decrease barriers to housing is probably a function of our land management division. We can do that kind of work in-house. It's just we have a kind of a capacity issue to do that. We have a lack of resources to do that work. And I think also the board is directing kind of an objective outside look as well. So it kind of falls into this gray area of, are we getting a service provided to us, or are we asking someone to perform our function for us? If we're asking a contractor to perform the function for us, then they are an agent and they are a public official subject to ORS Chapter 244, the ethics statutes, ethics rules. And then they would be prohibited from using any work that they did in that role to create a future financial opportunity for themselves. That would be an ethical issue. So we're in kind of a gray area. I think that the work that we're asking for in this RFQ is work that wouldn't become code for a couple of years. So there would be kind of a delay between what a contractor would discover now and write in a report that would then become code. So this, I think, just to give like a fair view of where I see this as an ethical issue, I think it's a little far out from actually being an ethical issue, but again, there is some gray area there. I don't know if that helps the conversation.
So I'm going to try to understand that last statement, Ms. Doran. It's a little far out from being an ethical issue, meaning it's not an ethical issue, or if it is, it's a pretty gray, distant area.
A future potential conflict of interest, I think, at best.
At best. Something that could be covered with an assurance, as recommended by Mr. Cheney. And the date on that letter again is August 12th?
21st, I believe.
August 21st. Then I am a little bit perturbed here. I really am. If we got that letter on the 21st and we knew this applicant was going to be a part of this proceeding, why did we not ask for that reassurance prior to this coming before the board? I mean, was it my job to, I don't think it was my job to ask for that reassurance.
Chair, I can answer that. The group met and reviewed, and its recommendation was to pursue, based on our past practice, was to pursue the lowest bid. And my request was to bring this forward to the board because there was some disagreement about that, and because it was a board assignment, I felt like it should come to the board for discussion and ultimately a decision. So it's really for the board to decide who do you want to select, and if you want to select the group that has a conflict, then we can pursue, whatever scenario you would like to try to relieve that conflict.
And Ms. Dornan said it's a very gray, distant conflict, right? Is that correct characterization?
In my analysis, that's what I
Okay.
determined.
All right.
And I would add, Chair, the email didn't say it was an ethical issue, and it said that we could probably handle it by asking for those reassurances. So I didn't intend to ask for those reassurances unless we were awarding the contract to that contractor.
Okay. Makes it tough for me to make a decision. Okay. I believe that that this firm is the one, or this group is the one that is going to be the best qualified to go as the best product. And what we want is the best product, which doesn't always come at the lowest price, Ms. Morgreisky. We know that. We need the best product. I believe that this group is the one that's going to give us the best product ultimately, and the product we're looking for is an assessment of barriers to affordable housing in Lane County. We hear them almost every single meeting. We hear about reasons that it's costing more to build houses at any level in Lane County, which means that if it's costing us more, and we hear comments from the broad public about this, that an internal review of it probably wouldn't satisfy the board, that it would be a review of the work that's been criticized, shall we say, by people who are in the community wishing that things would happen a little bit quicker, a little bit smoother, whether it be for affordable housing or housing at any level. So that being said, we have before us what I believe is the best qualified. However, if there's a conflict of interest, which is stated by Commissioner Buck, I need more information on the conflict of interest, because my no vote on this would not kill this motion. It would kill the motion today. It wouldn't kill this group's application unless there were a subsequent motion that were to pass. So that being said, if I'm going to vote yes on this motion, I need to have reassurances that if from somebody that we can get an assurance from the parties in question that they will not use it as to their own advantage. Mr. Morgreisky.
Mr. Chair, one of your options, I think, is that you could, if the board wanted to pursue, or if the board voted to support the motion that's on the table, you could amend the motion to request that the administrator work with staff and the contractor that's in question to secure the appropriate remedies or statements necessary to achieve the resolution of the conflict of interest prior to executing the contract. So you could make a decision on awarding the contract contingent upon that. I think that's an option. It gives, you're sort of, I think we've talked about the ways in which that would be achieved. So I don't know if council has another thought on that.
I think that sounds practicable.
Okay. So then the motion would need to be amended to include the contract to be awarded subsequent to an assurance from the parties involved that it would not be used to advance their, can you restate that?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not recommending you do this.
No,
I'm just saying
you're
you're asking for a path forward to, if there's a desire to approve this today, that seems to me to be the path forward to approve it today, is to amend the motion and direct the administrator to secure the appropriate verifications from the applicant that there is no conflict of interest, or if there is a potential conflict, that they will take appropriate steps to mitigate the conflict.
So secure the appropriate verification that any potential conflict of interest that they would take appropriate steps to mitigate that.
Yeah, I mean, just so we're clear, the contractor that's proposing to do the work to evaluate our processes and our code is also an applicant that's required to follow the processes and code. So that's why there was a question about, that we posed to county council of, this certainly appears to the naked eye to be a potential of a conflict of interest when you have someone who's going to recommend potential changes to the code and processes, who's also in the middle of that code and that processes. So that's why this is in front of you for a question, and I think that it's certainly an option for you to direct us to secure the statements that we've discussed today to alleviate any potential conflict moving forward, if that's your decision.
Thank you. Then I have a question for you, Director Hurley. This would, that would be a more expedient method to get the contract in place. However, what is the time constraint on the contract, on letting this contract? If we needed 2 more weeks, is that it'd actually be 2 or 3 more weeks?
I don't believe that in any of the quotes we had a time limit on them of how long was valid.
Okay. All right. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, and what I pose to my colleagues here on the board is, what constitutes an assurance? Just saying on a piece of letter to the Board of Commissioners, hey, I'll never use any of my suggestions in this report for any future applications that I ever submit to the county in the future. It doesn't seem practicable. I personally, the conflict of interest is the biggest issue for me, but not the only issue. I would think that you would need some kind of legal document that they would sign in order to have any teeth in an assurance, in order for them to, for the board majority to proceed with them. But it's not my only issue. Again, these people have never worked together on any consulting jobs of this type ever before. And they're twice as much as an RFQ, more than one RFQ, that have experience doing this work. So it seems completely out of precedent in order to move forward with an application that has multiple issues. Thank you, Chair.
Further discussion? Commissioner Seneca?
Well, we could kind of what if this forever. I mean, Morant and McLeod, however you say it. I mean, they could technically do the same stuff if they are in this for their own personal reasons versus doing what we asked them to do, was look at barriers to affordable housing. I don't know, is it that argument that they could possibly use something later on really holds up, because that could go with anybody that was looking to do this job. It's not just one particular group.
Very good. Further discussion? Commissioner Laval?
Thank you, Chair. I think we also, like I said, or like Commissioner Seneca said, we could beat this dead horse for a long time with different terms and different emphases. But here's the thing I think that we need to bring to the public. These people that were proposing aren't having conflicts of interest. They're displaying lived experience. And I think there's a big, vast difference between the two. We could have hired anyone from this area, architect firms, ex-developers, land use attorneys who had experiences through our land management division, who had either a project in process or had a project in process now settled, and we could have the same argument. I think in this proposal, we need someone in this line hiring that has lived experience. These people have lived experience. They can hit the ground running, make quicker decisions, not have to be schooled up. The other party we're considering is more of an ADU, accessory dwelling unit firm. That's what most of their qualifications were. We're not asking the consultants to come in and tell us how to build ADUs. We've got a program to build ADUs already in place. Springfield's got an active program. We're looking at programs to help rural sites build ADUs. We need streamlined processes to get stuff built in Lane County. And we need someone with lived experience, and these guys have it. Thank you.
For the discussion, Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. It's not a true statement to say that the other applicants don't have lived experience. They absolutely do, and that's why they're consultants and do this work. Also, the other applicants don't have conflict of interest. We don't do planning applications with the county. I want to make that perfectly clear to the public who may see the majority of this board push forward consultants to change our land use practices or recommend other changes to the way in which we do business for housing in general, because these are not the right people that we should be moving forward for this work. It feels very much like we are giving extra money to people with conflicts of interest in order to provide services for the county. It's a bad look.
Vice Chair Trigger?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Buck stated one of the things I wanted to clarify, that there's a difference between somebody who might use the land use application process here and someone who might offer their professional services as a consultant. So that's an important distinction. The proposal, the organization that submitted a proposal that is largely versed in ADUs is actually the mid-range one, not the lowest cost one. So that is also not, for the public record, an accurate reflection of the options here. We have an obligation as a board to be good stewards of public dollars and to protect the interests of this organization and reduce risk, reduce our risk liability. So whether there is an actual conflict of interest, we don't know. A potential, we do know. The best way to avoid potential conflict of interest is to award the consulting contract to a company that clearly does not have a potential, let alone an actual conflict of interest, because they are not Lane County-based folks who might use our land use planning and permitting process now or in the future. It's not what they do. What they do professionally is what the RFQ, a request for qualifications to produce the work that we're asking. They meet those qualifications and they meet our best practice of coming in at the lowest dollar. So I very much appreciate Commissioner Buck being explicit in her concerns. I want to put my concerns explicitly on the record for the public about what is happening here and the process by which it is happening that, again, did not allow us to come out of the gate and have an authentic, integrous conversation about the scope of work and who is the best consultant to deliver on that. We had a motion on the table immediately. We have a motion on the table for a group that did not demonstrate actually any experience doing what we are asking them to do with this contract. And we have consultants who did exactly that at half the price. I don't see how we can justify passing this motion. I don't see how anyone can feel justified in passing this motion. And finally, you cannot simultaneously say internal evaluation of processes is a clouded judgment and then say these are the best folks to do it because they have that insider knowledge. That's simply a contradictory statement. Thank you.
And thank you, and I'm not going to get into bickering and bantering at the podium. We have before us a motion with qualified consultants who do have a great deal of background in Lane County. Do you have a suggestion for a modification to the motion has been made? Are you going to make that modification?
Certainly, I think what council suggested is a very good way to path forward. I would certainly modify my motion to include that within, let's say, 2 weeks, we would secure some sort of assurances from this firm that what they would find and revealed would not be used for personal gain or contrary to ethics. I mean, like council has spoken, the ethics thing is gray and in the future and possible, but we're making it fact in this particular discussion, and it's just not a matter of fact yet. So I would adjust the motion to reflect that, to get a certified letter through council into the file before we award the RFQ.
Look to the second of the motion.
Yeah, the only thing I would second or modify that is I'd put it on council's timeline for, as far as getting the letter. But yeah, I second that.
Very good. And
Chair Farr,
Ms. Jones?
Chair Farr,
Yeah.
if we can get the full motion restated with the amended language all at once, it would be very helpful.
I would love to give that a try, but I'm not going to. Commissioner, would you give us the motion?
Okay, let me get it down here just a second. I move to direct the county administrator to hire the consultants of Ken Howe and Jim Mann to conduct a comprehensive review of systems and processes within the jurisdiction and control of Lane County to gain understanding what Lane County government can do to increase the availability and affordability of housing in Lane County, subsequent to a conditional letter of ethical conflicts or challenges that they may have that they would not use going forward if awarded the contract.
Second.
Ms. Jones, was that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Further discussion to the motion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay?
Nay.
Passes 3-2 with Commissioners Buck and Vice Chair Trieger in opposition. Thank you. Okay, then we'll move down the agenda. Item 10C is discussion and action in the matter of vetting the construction of a mixed waste processing facility. And Mr. Mokrajewski, I believe that Director Hurley is back with us, and could you introduce the balance of the panel, please?
Yes, Chair. Dan Hurley, our Public Works Director, I think is pulling up a presentation, and Jeff Orlandini, our, what do we call you, Jeff? Our Waste Management Division Manager is here as well. So we have an update you heard public comment on this morning, and an update and discussion on our mixed waste processing facility, and looking for some direction from the board. Dan?
All right, let me bring up some notes real quick. All right, thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Very excited to bring this item to you today. This is an item that was listed in your strategic plan. It was an objective to fully vet the construction of a material processing facility, a waste processing facility for the Short Mountain landfill. And I'm very proud of the work that Waste Management has done, in particular Mr. Orlandini, in vetting this project to date. There's a lot of exciting things about this project, and we're looking forward to bringing the vetting to you to update you and see what further vetting you would like and get direction from you, because further actions from here would obligate the county through contracts and property purchases, and we need to know if you're still supportive or what other questions you have about this project. So starting with a picture here of the Glenwood Transfer Station, which used to be known as the Central Receiving Station. This vision for waste processing in the county goes back from before I was born. This facility was constructed in 1976, and it was envisioned to be a processing facility that would produce refuse-derived fuel. I've seen some sketches for this that included a drive-in movie theater next to it. You can see, the technology has advanced a lot since 1976. This didn't work out for processing back in the 70s. I heard there was an explosion involved. Some of you might know the story.
Tour that in high school.
But the technology has advanced considerably. We have optic sorters that, fly these materials by, I don't know how much the speed is amazing when you go and look at these facilities. We've toured a couple facilities down in California, several actually, by the consultant or the contractor we're working with on this project, Bulk Handling Systems, and it's very impressive. So just, where we came from, and this was the last major transformative investment by the county in our waste system. So we're excited that we could evolve our waste processing. We haven't always been doing it this way. We used to have scattered dump and burns, sites all around the county, dozens of those, many of them turned into our transfer stations. After that, we started filling in gravel pits, from all the road construction in the 60s. We filled up the Day Island landfill next to the river with no liner. That, leached into the river over time. We filled up a big pit over by Bethel Danabo area. What's the name of the landfill? Is that, yeah, Bethel Danabo. And that still causes us environmental problems. We had $1 million settlement on that about the methane that still leaks from that landfill. So we're trying to evolve our waste management here at the county to better manage it for the future, for our environment and future generations. So moving on, I wanted to also show you a picture from 1976 of what used to be the Oregon International Raceway. This is the site that was purchased to be the Short Mountain landfill. And if you've been out there recently, it's, somebody mentioned this morning it needs to be renamed Tall Mountain. But it's named for the mountain to the south, which is Short Mountain. But it's now, 150 feet of garbage. It's taken up about half of the permitted area and, getting close to the freeway. We do have a lot of space left at the landfill. We have about 70 years of life, but it is a finite resource, and it's one that we need to manage for future generations. So with the presentation today, we'll go through a comprehensive project overview. Then we'll get into the costs, the upfront costs and the operations costs. We'll talk about the need for a financing plan, next steps, and kind of a run through of what we've done for vetting so far and the status, and then talk about what our future next steps would be for the project. So starting off, our goal was to divert more material out of the landfill. This project would do this. It would divert up to 110,000 tons of waste annually. And for perspective, the landfill last year received 309,000 tons of waste. So roughly a third of the waste could be diverted annually. It would remove organics from the waste stream. And for folks that don't know, when you throw your banana peel in the garbage, it decays differently in the landfill where it produces methane. And methane is 80 times as potent as a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide if that banana peel were to compost naturally. It would extend the landfill life by 30 years, which is a big deal. When we run out of space at our landfill, we're likely going to have to transport our waste hundreds of miles to Eastern Oregon at a great expense. So while we might not see that in our lifetime, future generations will appreciate us extending the life of the landfill by 30 years. Some of the climate goals, this was a listed project in our climate action plan, one of our top priorities. It's also in the City of Eugene's climate action plan. This would generate biogas through an anaerobic digester, which would be able to offset natural gas. So it would, in addition to that benefit, would mitigate the methane from the landfill, and the landfill is the #1 emitter from county operations. About 77% of our county operations of CO2 emissions is from the landfill, and we have the potential to mitigate that through this project. What I'd really like to highlight, the excitement about this is it's an economic project too. We have the potential here to do a $135 million investment into the community. And most of that would be staying locally here through local jobs, opportunities for other businesses. And it's a unique public-private partnership that we're looking at with bulk handling systems. So we went through an RFP process and selected bulk handling March of last year. There were 2 other proposals, but we felt that the bulk handling systems proposal was by far, the best interest for the county in meeting our goals. This project, in the board memo, it was originally estimated to produce about 140 jobs during the construction of it. Now we're looking at over 190 jobs during the construction and 65 ongoing jobs. And it's important to note that these aren't, if anybody's toured a material recovery facility up in the Portland area, this is not that sort of material recovery facility. Those are very dirty jobs with people picking things off the line. These are well-paying jobs to keep AI robotics, running, and all sorts of engineered equipment that these are high-paying jobs that our community could benefit from. And the last one I wanted to highlight is business opportunities. Keeping these materials locally is important to provide other opportunities for other businesses. You know, businesses like PacTech, which produces plastics, handles, and carriers for beverages, they need recycled materials. And just bailing our commingle recycling and sending out up to other material recovery facilities, you know, doesn't allow for benefits of keeping those materials here locally. If we can sort them and then put them to further processing, we can put those materials to use here in our community and grow more businesses. And I'll pass to here to Jeff Orlandini, who worked through the RFP process to select bulk handling systems, and we'll talk about bulk handling.
Great, thank you, Dan. So, as I think most folks know, bulk handling has thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment across the world. They have hundreds of facilities that focus on mixed waste. And so I think that's a distinction that we want to bring up, is that this is about processing waste, you know, and it's a dirty material, but, you know, they had the best response in terms of how to handle this and get those materials out of our waste stream. And so, as Dan spoke, you know, we've toured their facilities in San Jose, both ones that are owned and operated by private, ones that are owned and operated by county, ones that are private and public partnerships. And so we've been able to see those models. I would add that typically ones that are more privately owned and operated or have oversight tend to be the cleanest and have the best educational facilities that we've seen, which is a piece we'll talk about later. Come the next one, Dan. And so what we're looking at for the land, and you can see the parcel in Goshen in the, I don't know if I'd call that blue or teal color, would be the land that we're looking at. It's a 26-acre property. It's currently zoned light industrial, which is important because that's not a designation that would work for mixed waste. We'd have to try to zone that differently, although our understanding of the intention in zoning in Goshen was to bring in jobs to that area, mainly manufacturing. And while this may not be considered manufacturing, it brings in a lot of jobs to that area. It has a good, you know, proximity to other industrial properties. And then, you know, we have done the purchase sale agreement. Again, want to be very clear that one thing we'd come back to this body with would be, you know, the actual sale agreement to buy this property. We've not purchased this property. We've simply done a purchase sale agreement to allow us to do due diligence. So that's to get that 30% design done and also to do some wetland mitigation and assessment so that we know what it would take to build on this property. So this is a pretty nifty aerial view from I-5. So if you were looking at it from a helicopter, I guess, or a drone, that's what it would look like from there. Really great, you know, facility, looks really neat from I-5 and is something that we'd be really proud of to see and have as kind of a showcase for Goshen. And then we also want to show you we've shown a couple diagrams of the facility, and this is the most current one based on that parcel. And so really, we're not going to get heavy into this. We've done a few different presentations on how this equipment works. This is just how it would be sited if you were to kind of take the roof off of it and look at the guts, as it were, of the facility.
I wanted to touch a little bit more on the carbon impact. I had a question after we presented several months ago from a resident wondering, you know, given the amount of steel, you know, all the machinery, the building, what is the carbon impact of constructing the facility? And I thought that was a great question, and I didn't know the answer. So we asked a good company to do an analysis for us. They spent several months, you know, going through this to refine the numbers, and it was surprising how big of the net benefit was compared to the carbon impact of the construction of the facility. So construction of the facility was about 14,581 metric tons CO2 equivalent. The net emission reductions was 4.5 million metric tons CO2 equivalent. So the benefits would outweigh construction and operation emissions in just a few months. So just to keep things in perspective of the, you know, the carbon impact of construction versus the carbon savings of the biogas from the anaerobic digester and the recycled materials and the reduced emissions from the landfill. So
And also just wanted to be very clear, that is also the operation of the facility for the 25-year lifespan. So that is not just building it, but that is actually operating it for 25 years. So in 25 years, when this is done, it's still that much of a net benefit. The Education Center, as a former nonprofit educator, I get really excited and geek out on education centers. And so this is the views. So if you look on that picture that has the tables, that would be on the second floor, and all those windows overlook the actual processing equipment below. So you could bring school groups in. We partner with Bring to actually bring in over 20 tours a year with students. We have a program over at Quamish Prairie, our wetland over there. We bring different student groups there too. So this is a place that they could come and meet before they go and do that. And also Bull County would intend to use this as finally having a location when people come to Eugene to learn about their company, to look at potentially buying product, to actually see what they do in Eugene. Typically they come here and then they have to either see videos or travel to other states or countries to see this. So having that would be a big draw for us here in Eugene.
So now getting into costs, wanted to touch in where we're at here. So we did the 30% design, which has helped us refine the numbers to what we think are very accurate numbers. The costs did go up, as happens a lot with infrastructure projects as you get into the design. Originally, we were thinking this was going to be a $100 million project, of which the county's portion would be $30 million. It's gone up to $135 million. The county's portion would be about $35 million. So we would be responsible for the construction of the building. Bulk handling systems would be responsible for the equipment inside the facility. But with the cost of the building, we think we can have about $15 million of that offset through tax credits if we make an arrangement with bulk handling system through that. There's some very significant tax credits that are available right now, which is, part of the urgency of this project is to tap into that IIJA funding, and there's a production tax credit of up to 40% that will help pay for this project. So it's a very timely project that we would want to capitalize on those tax benefits that won't be around forever there. The land cost actually has gone up and then down. We were originally looking at the Short Mountain landfill to site this. When we got into the design parts of that, where we were trying to tuck it away to be out of the landfill footprint, just became unfeasible. We were looking at retaining walls over 30, 40 feet, and the cost of that just grew to the point where we needed to look outside of the landfill footprint. So we started looking in the surrounding area. Very difficult to find a large site, which makes me wondering and worried for relocating the Glenwood transfer station. It will be hard to find a large site that doesn't impact neighbors significantly, where there will be a lot of opposition. We were able to find this site in Goshen, which isn't an easy site. It still has some wetland issues. It has clay soils that will need some high density fill to be able to construct on there, but it's a doable site. And it's the direction that we want to go. We want to go into Goshen so that we're not adding mileage, for the haulers and for us being close to the landfill. Goshen is really where we want to be with this project. So we looked at a project on the west side of Highway 99. It didn't have great access. It was around the $3 to $4 million range, I believe. We ended up then finding this property on the east side, which is the one that Jeff showed you, and so the cost is about $1.5 million on that. So again, the county cost would be about $35 million. Waste Management would need to pay for that through bonding. So we would need to bring some more analysis on what that bond would look like to be able to pay that off over time through tipping fees. Getting into the operations cost, bulk handling again would pay for the equipment. The equipment's estimated at about $85 million. Bulk handling systems would operate the facility. They're experts in the world of recycling and being able to find markets for these commodities. And the county would just continue our current recycling operations and landfilling the waste that comes out of the facility and waste that doesn't go through the facility. Not all waste would go through the facility. We're not looking at construction, demolition through. Basically, we're looking at garbage trucks that are servicing residential and commercial customers. Ongoing operations. So bulk handling system, contrary to what you heard this morning in public comment, doesn't have a guaranteed profit on this. We would basically be charged a per ton rate for the waste that they process. The the per ton rate would be incorporated into the tipping fee increases that we're proposing. And we already talked about the bonding and that bulk handling would operate the facility. So getting into the ongoing operations and the tipping fee increases of that bottom section there. The tipping fee increases that we would need for this would be phased in over a period of about 4 years. We need a pulse of funding to be able to do this capital investment. And we already do a CPI increase we bring to the board every year of approximately 3%. So we're looking at about an 8% increase on top of that. And what I want to emphasize, because it was kind of misconstrued, I felt, in public comment, is that we're not talking about an 8% or 11% impact to people's garbage fees. The tipping fee is only one component of garbage haulers' costs, and we've worked closely with the City of Eugene to determine what proportion of that it is, and it's about 20% of the garbage haulers' costs. So the other 80% would not be changing because of this proposal. So we're looking at just an 8% increase on that 20% of the garbage haulers' costs. So when we put that through the model that we've worked with with the City of Eugene, and I think we'll get into that, we're looking at less than a 2% increase. And I think that's in the next slide. So, but we're looking at an 8% on top of CPI increase for the first 2 years to build up funds to start construction, and then another 2 years into the initial operations, and then sustaining that through the operations phase and tapering down to CPI. So, getting more granular into the household fees, again, the disposal portion is about 20% of the monthly bill. So the landfill increase would result in a 2.2% increase to the monthly fee, which is about 55 to 70 cents each year. So each year for 4 years, we're looking at a 55 to 70% per month increase. So, we're talking about under $5 for over a 4-year period. And just some comparison, Netflix increased their monthly rate $4.50 over the last 4 years. When I look at the garbage is typically the lowest utility that people pay. And I get that any increase impacts people. I get that. But when we look at the benefits of this project and the pretty small increases comparatively to utilities, I think this project makes a lot of sense. I looked back through the rates we were charged for waste management from MWMC, Metro Wastewater, infrastructure needs for capital improvements. And there was a string of increases that went from to 6 to 7 to 11 to 19 and down to 8. And people were charged that and, didn't bat an eye. So, when we put this in comparison, I think we've kept it to modest increases to support a pretty exciting project that can really transform our waste processing. Transfer station users, you want to go ahead and get into that, Jeff?
Yeah, so I'll just touch on, I wanted to try to be clear. So we're looking at curbside for an average customer, so that's that 32 or 35 gallon can that's collected every week. After 4 years of these increases, we're estimating that to be about $30 more from now until 4 years per year. That's over the 4, so it's not next year it goes up $30, right? That's equivalent to $2.50 a month is what we'd be looking at over the 4 years. So it's hard for us to know. I only know what I pay at the curb in Eugene, and so, that would go from the $27-ish a month to closer to $29, $30 a month over the 4 years. For commercial customers, we only really were able to look at data on the 2 sizes, like a 2-yard to 3-yard can, and we estimate that depending on the level of service, whether or not that, the size of that can, that would be looking at either between $21 and $65 increase after the 4 years per month for them. And so if you're a larger user, that would be larger. If you're a smaller company, that was what our estimates are. And it's sometimes difficult to get into the weeds much more than that on other things because there's not a lot of sharing there's a lot of competition in our county from haulers. And so there's not a lot of sharing of rates, but we do know those curbside rates in our area. But beyond that, the drop boxes and things like that are harder for us. The transfer stations, most of our folks that use a rural transfer station as their garbage service, so they don't use it, they don't have a curbside service, either by choice or potentially not available to them. Most of them are bringing in what we call the minimum, and so that's either like a Glenwood or Florence, about 300 pounds of waste, or what we say is like the 3 cans, and that is currently a minimum fee of $13. Over the 4 years, those increases would be, it'd go up $1, then $1.50, then $1.50, then $1.75. And so that's showing what the increase would be to those folks that were using our rural transfer stations as their garbage service, as opposed to curbside. We did look at some of other areas, other counties. So our current minimum here is $13. Our per ton at the landfill is $95.16. That's what it is if you're not at the landfill. If you're at our 2 other scaled sites, it's $91.31 at Short Mountain. The minimums at other counties range from $19.65 to $70 as a minimum. And then on their tonnage rates, they range from 94 to 148.45. Douglas County was the lowest at 94. The next lowest was $107.45 per ton. So there's quite a jump. So it's kind of like us in Douglas County holding down that low end, and then the next lowest was 107. And the counties that we looked at were Washington, Marion, Douglas, Deschutes, Multnomah, and Jackson counties. When we looked at that, and this is just what we could find on their public sites.
And I would just like to add to that we've kept our fees low over the years because we have a publicly owned landfill. We're not generating additional revenue for shareholders. And even with these rates, we'll still be at the lower end of fees when you look around the state. So we've built our model here, our estimates on the costs for construction and the impact to residents, assuming that we wouldn't get any additional funding. We will be pursuing other state and federal funding over the next couple of years as we get into this project if the board wants to move forward. One of those is, it's called SWIFR. It's a solid waste infrastructure for recycling grants. We think we could get up to $4 million for the project through that grant program. There are also a couple other grants listed here. The first one, or the second bullet, is through EPA, and the third is through the state of Oregon, where we think we could tap into additional grant funding. We'll also be approaching the state legislature. Again, this was a priority by the board. We did a board ask of $15 million in lottery bond allocations. We ended up not getting into that. As you know, the legislature was a little dysfunctional this last session, and not a lot of productive things happened through there, and there was pretty sole focus on addressing issues of houselessness. So at this point, wanted to update you just kind of on the status of the vetting and what we've done so far, and get your input of what we should still do. So on the technical feasibility side, we feel that we have vetted that. We have visited bulk handling systems facilities in California. We've checked into their qualifications. If you go into bulk handling systems offices, and I would recommend all of you take a tour through there. It's an amazing local company. But there's a table that has many awards. There's probably at least 8 Solid Waste Association of North America awards, SWANA awards, for the top project of the year. So they're a very reputable company that delivers outstanding projects. The siting feasibility part Jeff talked about. We've gone through the property evaluation. We've fitted the 30% design to the property. We've entered into a PSA purchase sale agreement. We do have another necessary step of working through a zoning issue that we think is achievable. But that part is not complete, and we would need to come back to you on that zoning analysis. On the financial feasibility, we've done a long-term financial plan. We've looked at the tipping fee rating increases. We haven't gone through analysis on the bonding, and we would need to do that. We've done a lot of work, and we've hired a solid waste firm to help us through the contracting piece with bulk handling systems to start developing a contract. But there are a few pieces in that are not complete, and we would plan to bring those forward to you. And then finally, looking at the project through our strategic lenses. So we have 3 lenses listed in our strategic plan: stewardship of resources, equity, and collective impact. So on the financial sustainability, we're looking at a 25-plus year project. We've done the analysis financially and with rates to be able to sustain that. On the system impact, this is a benefit for the community. Again, keeping these materials in the community. Contrary to what you heard this morning, this would not impact EcoSort. This facility would not process construction demolition materials. It would impact in that they invested into baling equipment to send commingled materials out of the region. You know, that's not our problem if they put an investment in there. You know, hopefully they could use that baling machinery for other uses, but we think it's a benefit to keep those materials here in the community. It also wouldn't impact International Paper. Haulers would still have the opportunity to bring their cardboard to International Paper. International Paper doesn't process other types of recyclables, but we're not asking for any flow control to require haulers to use this facility. We're trying to provide it as a benefit and a low-cost option so people aren't having to transport these materials up into the Portland area. On equity, again, you know, going back to the household, you know, rate, I think I misspoke, you know, not being over $5 a month. It's actually under $3 a month and closer to $2. So we think that's a modest increase that the household rate players could absorb. But then there's a lot of benefit of this money circulating in the community. All this money to build the facility, to sustain it, these provide local jobs, and that money circulates through wages in the community. We've seen a rough estimate, and the chamber echoed what their estimate was, that it's a $200 million impact to this community through that compounding of circulating wages through our community. So a huge economic development project, and that gets into that collective impact part. And then lastly, you know, this exceeds our climate goals and our recovery rate goals. We have a 52% recovery rate. You know, we're trying to get to 63%, which we had committed to working towards in Oregon statute. But this will get us to about 72%, and that's exciting to be able to continue to keep materials out of the landfill and put recycled materials back into the community. And then the last slide I have for you, I just wanted to call out some competing interests. You heard a lot of public comment today. I wasn't surprised to hear comment, particularly from the haulers. You know, none of the haulers want to see rates increase because they bear the brunt of having to flow those rate increases down to the communities, to their customers. I do want to call out that, you know, with the City of Eugene, through the licensing program, the haulers have guaranteed profit margins. So they would be able to pass these rate increases to their customers without significant impact to their bottom line. Other competing interests is that we do have other capital improvement needs. You know, by keeping this fee increase modest, I think we could have other fee increases that could also be modest to pay for the Glenwood Transfer Station, if that's a desire of the board. We've spoken with you on the Glenwood Transfer Station issue. We're going to be doing some more analysis on that, some public input. I'm not convinced at this point that that's what the public wants or if it's in the best interest of the public. Again, we're not wanting to add miles of transporting this material out to, you know, a relocated transfer station far on the end of town or in Glenwood. So we'll be doing more analysis on the Glenwood Transfer Station and coming back to you on that. But I see those as separate projects and not necessarily one prohibiting the other. And the last one is that people should know, the public should know, you should know, that Sanapak and EcoSort are not locally owned companies. Several years ago, they were purchased by Waste Connections. Waste Connections is a mega company. It's the third largest garbage hauler in the country, operating in 43 states. They have a net revenue of over $5 billion. So I expect that they will be politicking to stop this project. They have a financial interest in keeping this project from happening because They are the monopoly around recycling right now. It's the only place that other haulers and Lane County can bring recyclable materials, and they can charge whatever they want on it. There's also the Modernization of Recycling Act, and money's going to be coming through that act through producer responsibility organizations. So soon, all customers will be paying a small fee on the items they purchase that have packaging, and that packaging will flow through the PROs. And the PROs will pay for transporting recyclables out of a community if there isn't processing available. And so Santa Pac would like to see that money coming to pay for their transportation costs. It would also pay for the upgrades needed for material recovery facilities. And the facility that Waste Connections owns in Vancouver is an outdated facility that needs a lot of investment. So they would like to see that money. So I just want you to be aware that there are competing interests around this project, because I understand that each of you have been contacted already. So just to be aware there. Summary, we've already talked about huge community investment project, bringing in private investment over $100 million. And the county's share is, comparatively small, a $35 million investment to get $100 million. Lots of job creation. We would have these materials sorted locally and available, and the operations costs would be covered through these modest increase. We would increase our diversion rate by over 15%, significantly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and it would improve our recycling systems. I just got one last thing. These are things that I hate throwing away. All right? But people throw them in the recycling even they shouldn't, because right now they're not recyclable through our system. And it's not that they couldn't be recycled. So these polypropylene yogurt tubs, they are a very recyclable plastic. But Santa Pac doesn't want to send them out of the area and transport them because they're bulky and lightweight. So it's not cost effective for them. Likewise, these PET clamshell trays and things like this, they are made of the same PET that bottles are made out of. Very recyclable. The problem is that because these outdated MRFs sort primarily by shape, these get smashed and get put into the paper recycling and contaminate the paper bales. It's not that they couldn't be recycled, but the recycling facility that we're proposing would be able to optically sort these and treat them as bottles and get them recycled. So I would be excited to see that and to not have to throw these types of materials away. And I think our community would be excited about that too. So next steps, Jeff?
Yeah, so this is what we're looking at for next steps. What we would be doing at the direction of the board to continue moving forward on this would be aiming to come back in November with tipping fee increase approval. And so that would, ideally be the first 2-year approval for tip fees so that we know that we can get this off the ground. We would come back with the contract documents completed and ready for approval by the board, and then also the property sale approval from the board. So those are 3 things that we would come to the board, and that would essentially, enable us to move forward on the project. We would, again, at the direction of the board to continue moving forward, continue with, engagement with the cities and whittling down on, with, City of Eugene, City of Springfield. I know that there's potential that since our data, they might have done a modest fee increase, and then we can come back. We want to be able to come back to you with the real actual numbers that we can approve. And so we would whittle in on that. We would work on that zoning adjustment for the property, the bonding plan, continue the site prep. Most of that right now, we are currently doing our phase 1 wetland mitigation and assessment so that we know what that would look like. After approval by the board, we'd go into the phase 2 so that we could continue with that mitigation. Just a caveat, that's a 26-acre property. We're building on 8 acres of it because it's wetlands. We're not gonna be able to build on the 20 acres. So that's what we would be continuing to do if directed by the board to do so.
So that concludes our presentation. Again, we're excited about this project. We think it's a viable project. This is a once-in-a-generational opportunity to make a significant investment here into our community and for our waste systems. So we would entertain any questions you have, or would love to hear any additional vetting you would like for us to pursue. Thank you.
Right on, Director Hurley, thank you. And thank you, Jeff. I'll look to the board for questions and or comments. Looking online to Commissioner Buck, I see none. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. This is very exciting. I'm fully in support of the work, and I take the recommendation and have us keep working, but we have more conversation, I think, before we get to that point. I very much appreciate you clarifying some of the misperceptions on the part of some folks who spoke this morning and who have reached out to us via email. That's really helpful, particularly that it's 8, not 11%. That's a total of 11, and that it's 8 of the 20% of their cost. Those things really matter. And so one thing I will say that I wonder is, have you considered, is there a plan to do a sort of haulers and other stakeholders roundtable so that you can share a little more of that granular detail and have them really ask their questions, whether they like or agree with the answers, just so that they're working off of factual information about these kinds of things, is my first question.
If I could speak to that, I would say that we have had multiple engagement with stakeholders. We have a roughly quarterly stakeholder meeting that we've been doing for probably 7 years. And we have talked about this facility at numerous times throughout that process, and Jeff could speak to that because he leads those meetings now, to what level of detail. We'd be happy to go into more detail at the next meeting, which I think we have one coming up very soon. I would say some of the people that spoke today, some of them have been involved in those stakeholder meetings. One in particular has chosen never to attend one of those stakeholder meetings. So, we have tried to engage stakeholders, and we will continue to do that.
Great, thank you. When was the last time tipping fees were raised?
This year,
This year?
yeah, we did a 7%.
And think how to ask this question. And some of this is based off the comments this morning, so I'm going to take them with a grain of salt. But this whole idea of opportunities for local recyclers to process materials, it's my understanding that a lot of what we get now is stuff that they couldn't take through their recycling because it was contaminated or otherwise mixed. And that's exactly some of what this facility would address, is a greater ability to sort by type of material, and that's why it has a higher recovery rate, right? So it really isn't sort of an apples to oranges with what they're, or are they bailing dirty, contaminated recyclables that then don't actually end up getting recycled because by the time they reach where they send them, they're rejected?
So yes, this would have a higher recovery rate from the materials that come in. And I do want to point out that there would be 2 lines of processing in the facility. One would be for the garbage, to pull out remaining recyclables and organics, and the other is for the commingled recycling. And we would be keeping those separate for contamination issues that the DEQ would like us to see. We could, as the board could, entertain taking in waste from outside the county. I wasn't planning to have that conversation today, but to help pay for the facility, we could do that. I think other counties will be looking to bring waste to us, and if not waste, also recycling. There aren't a lot of options as you move south down the Willamette Valley. And so this would have a commingle processing line along with it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and that organics piece, I forget, that is very separate from what we heard this morning. That's garbage, nobody else is touching that, and that's a big part of the recovery and the methane, the reduction in emissions and so on. That's really important.
We would be the first in the state to be doing that, and I think we'd be a model for the state. There are many in California doing this, though.
Fantastic. And then my last question, you mentioned that tax credit, but that won't be available forever. What kind of time pressure, time sensitivity are we under to take advantage of that opportunity?
Great question. I'm not sure if I know. We need to start construction by the end of 2024.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further questions? Commissioner Buck, I see your physical hand raised. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hurley, I was hoping that you might be able to expand a little bit about our discussion that we had at our AOC district meeting regarding landfills in general. Not all of our commissioners were there, but some important information was shared because we had a regional conversation about landfills and capacity, and that is it really true? Like, we're not seeing new landfills being made. So we need to be able to preserve as long as possible the landfill that we have here locally, especially if we entertain intake from other communities where they may not have landfill capacity.
Yes, Commissioner, I could expand on that. So we haven't seen a landfill be permitted in Western Oregon for decades. And I've heard at least one person from the DEQ say it's unlikely that we would see another one. There are a lot of challenges in siting a landfill on this rainy part of the state. The DEQ would rather see waste processed on the east side where there's plenty of land, there's not neighbor conflicts, there's not wetland issues, less rain that ends up producing the leachate, the wastewater. So we're lucky to have the landfill we have now. If we were to try to site that now, we wouldn't be able to site it due to proximity of the airport, wetlands issues, and other issues. So we're lucky to have this resource. Other landfills are nearing capacity. So Benton County got a big surprise from Coffin Butte saying that they might only have 2 years left. I'm hearing Douglas County may have 10 years or less. So there is this issue of capacity in Western Oregon in particular. Portland is already shipping their waste hundreds of miles to Arlington, Eastern Oregon, in Washington.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussions, questions? Commissioner Lovell?
Thank you, Chair. Tough sell. You guys did a great job. I mean, if you were selling me a Hyundai, I'd probably be buying and walking out the door with a new car. So you guys did a great job. So I appreciate all your data. You know, I have to disclose a semi-conflict of interest at this point. Back in my second career before I was a developer, I was a photographer, traveled all over extensively the United States photographing for bulk handling systems and saw all their works and operations and did headshots of Steve and made him look like $1 million. So I would think that was part of the success of their operation, but I need to disclose that before I ask some of my questions. Yeah, truly, I think this is an exciting project. I think that Bulk Handling Systems does a great job. On one of our photo shoots, my son, who is in engineering, saw a problem with how they got their glass separated and made a suggestion, and lo and behold, the next site we were at, his idea was in production. So I thought that was pretty fun. But I do have some concerns, and so I have to voice those concerns because I'm balancing all of this out, because a lot of this decision-making was happened prior to me getting here. I represent Springfield. Springfield, as you know, is a working-class town. It's typically lower incomes, lower housing, and we have the largest Hispanic population in the county. Our rates are based on franchise agreements from Sanapac. I have direct experience with trash rates as a developer and a landlord of multiple properties in downtown, so rates always affect me. Just last year, our rates by this document in Springfield went up 8.15%. This concerns me when I look at us marketing numbers, and numbers can always be crunched to benefit the person who's speaking the numbers. And I understand what Vice Chair Trigger said, and I understand how these numbers work, but I also understand that 8.15% is going to continue to increase for a while in our sector, just based on the economics of fuel, transportation, cost of tires, et cetera. And so this 11% seems to me it's going to affect everyone, even our most vulnerable. Even my 92-year-old mother-in-law is going to have her garbage rates go up, and she's on a fixed income. Just in my own particular case, I've seen just in the last year our commercial garbage rates on Main Street go up $400 in 1 year. So as I do the math in here, and you know the way it looks to me personally is at the end of this 4-year period, I'm going to be paying about $600 or $800 more for garbage disposal than I'm currently paying now. Where does that go? It falls back on my tenants who are renting apartments. It falls back on restaurants who are depositing garbage in there. So this increase, as you sell it, it sounds great because it's only a few dollars or a few cents to the residential ratepayers, but it goes clear through our community with long and large tentacles. So I want to make that just clear to the public that it affects everybody on a long term. The other thing is I have a couple of controls. You answered that about the waste stream in the future. I was concerned about that the government would be someone who would assign where the waste stream is and who controls it. That bothered me, so you answered that question, so I appreciate that. I struggle, though, as an entrepreneur. What are we doing in the future to make free market opportunities for all the people who came to public testimony this morning? That's my first question. Does this hinder the free market opportunity for them to expand their mom and pop businesses, or does it make everybody kind of join the monopoly or get out kind of a thing?
Commissioner, if I could speak to the first point on rates and the impact to people, particularly low income. You know, one thing we haven't discussed as a board, and we could, is offering discounts to folks at coming to the transfer stations for low income. That we could have, we do a senior discount. You know, we could do a discount for people that have SNAP benefits, for example. We could also, work with the communities to see if they could explore that with their franchise waste haulers. So, there are some things where we could potentially mitigate impacts for equity. And then as far as closing opportunities to mom and pops or creating opportunities, I'm not sure if are you talking about the waste haulers or just in general for business opportunities?
Particularly the waste haulers.
So for waste haulers, I don't see this changing any of their opportunities. There would be an increased cost on their disposal fee, but we are not getting into franchising in the county area. We're not getting into waste control. They will still have the opportunities to bring their recycling either to this facility, which I think will be their cheapest cost option and probably less cost than they're paying now, or they could bring it elsewhere. So I don't see that as impacting opportunities for waste haulers business.
Many of the landfills outside of us, privately owned landfills, they'll charge you a rate based on the volumes you bring in. And so that actually could hurt a mom and pop who could only bring in, 6,000 tons a month versus somebody who can bring in, 100,000, and it's kind of like going to Home Depot. I pay what's on the shelf price and the big contractor pays less. Here, everybody pays the same. And so, while we aren't proposing flow control or requiring people to use short mount landfill, everyone that uses short mount landfill pays the same price. And so then they get to pass that to the customer. It's the same there. And so then the other changes in price would have to come from all those other levers that we don't control.
Most of the questions that I got were about who's going to buy the plastics. Plastic market's not what it used to be. We know that. I mean, you made a demonstration, Director Early, about the plastics, which you're right. I've seen those machines sort those things in lickety-split fashion, and it's pretty impressive. But who buys it? Currently, you said IP pretty much doesn't have commingled waste, and according to the last phone call I had with IP, they ship about 25 tons a week of plastics to Coffee Butte Mountain. So plastics got to go somewhere. Where we selling the plastics in the future?
And I'm sorry if I gave you incorrect information. I was not aware that IP was into the commingle business. I thought that was just through EcoSort. So
Nope.
I'd like more information on that. I'm not sure where they would be sending that material. But as far as who's buying the plastics, these become commodities on the open market. And the higher the quality of the bale, the more marketable they are. So this state-of-the-art facility would be able to deliver bales that are not as contaminated as the older, outdated material recovery facilities are in the Portland, Vancouver area. So I think those would be higher value commodities than might be coming out of other material recovery facilities. But, bulk handling systems wouldn't be interested in this business venture if they didn't think they couldn't market those plastics. And they could speak to that if you would like to have more information about where they would see selling these materials. We could have another work session with the board on that specific issue.
But currently, all plastics that are baled go to Portland for some sort of sale. That's where they end up.
Portland, or there's a Salem, a smaller material recovery facility in Salem.
So you mentioned EcoSort. EcoSort, as we know, is proposing to build a $14 to $20 million C&D separator for their construction debris. I met with those folks and talked to them, and their concern is that they're putting forth that kind of money to do their separation and their recovery for their needs. And all they're asking the county for is just some discounts on throwing the rest of the material that they can't collect and recycle away. So the question I have is this is a private company doing a private venture, and all of a sudden we look at government stepping in a big way, $135 million total to do this venture. And I'm just wondering if that's our place.
So Commissioner, if I could speak to that on the EcoSort part, construction demolition. So they're planning on a major investment into their construction demolition line. That is completely separate from what we will be doing with this facility. We are not proposing anything with construction demolition, so this wouldn't
understand
interfere with that at all. They're a publicly traded company looking for a discount. We would just want to entertain, how much of a discount we would want to give them. We already do give them a discount, and it's graded on how much recovery they get a higher discount. And that's a very unusual arrangement. I don't know of any other entity that's offering discounts already. We could look at deeper discounts with them if we want to entertain that, but just the lay of the land, it's unusual in this world for governments to partner with a public entity to give a discount like that. But we already are doing that.
Well, I guess my question's not that we're partnering with EcoSort. My point is that they're a private company making a private investment, and our investment in that is very little to benefit what they're doing. So, here we are, we're looking at $135 million, a $35 million investment from the county that we have to put in. I'm just wondering if that's our place to do that in the private sector. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, I've done that all my life. So in my world, it's like you invent ways to make things happen, and you may or may not get government help. But here we are, giving a big shovel load of help to this. And I think that just kind of raises an alarm in me. So the other thing I have a question on is the only other facility that I know of that Bulk Handling Systems has is in Marion County. I've toured that as well, looked at that facility. That was done by the haulers themselves. It was a partnership together. It wasn't a huge buy-in from the county, and that seems to be a successful operation with the exception of a dispute that's going on. And so what do you know about that?
I actually don't know anything about that, Commissioner. I was just informed of that yesterday. So I don't know that I can even get information because it's a legal dispute between the county and
I think that's a question that we as a board might need to ask as concerning how much time we spent just the item before on ethics and conflicts of interest. I think that's something that we should have in the public's purview to answer that question. And so then just the other examples that someone has called me, if I just want to put this in the public record as well, is that rate impacts is more substantial than people think. Just for example, St. Vincent de Paul, their rates, they calculated, are going to be $8,000 more a year. High schools, between $400 and $600 more a year. A Subway sandwich shop says it's going to be at least $40 to $55 more a month. So like I said before, these rate increases and tipping fees goes in the tentacles of a very wide and broad cloth. And so when we look at budgeting, and you're talking about how this is an enterprise fund and how we have some funds here and all that, what's the harm of us waiting a little bit until we have the money to actually do the project and not pass that money on to our customers and then make that investment when we have money in hand? It seems like since I've been here for the first 9 months, all county and government budgeting as well, we think the government's going to give us this, and we think the feds are going to give us this, and we're going to count this as money we already have. I would have never survived my career as an entrepreneur thinking like that. I had to have the money before I invested in anything. And so I'm asking the county maybe to think that way, because $135 million, as we've seen in the last number of months, can buy a lot of big ticket return on investment items. A baseball stadium, an indoor arena. We could use a fourth of that money and move the fairgrounds, the Lane Event Center, to a different site. There's a lot of big dollar investments that we could make in this community that would brag a lot of the points you're saying about jobs and money to the area that this figure represents. And lastly, I think we need to get our priorities in order. You'd mentioned a couple of things, the leachate line. We really have 4 priorities here as far as waste management goes in my mind. We've got the leachate line, which in my mind, if you're looking at Springfield, the district that I represent, the leachate line goes from Short Mountain Landfill and goes right past Glenwood. That makes Glenwood a real opportunistic way to develop with municipal facilities that would make this no man's land that all my 62 years of my life has just been a blight between 2 cities to redevelop and really make an economic engine between the 2 cities. We have also the transfer station site you said that we may or may not be moving. We have the Cottage Grove transfer site we need to think about, and this IMERV. So what's really our priorities incrementally as a county to get where we need to be? And that's in the position, in my mind, to have the most amount of return on our investment for our money. And I'm not convinced, although I love this idea, I love BHS, I'm not convinced this is our highest priority.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion? Commissioner Seneca.
just real quick to Commissioner Lovell's point, how would you rate, because I kind of have three projects, leachate line, rebuilding Glenwood, and the IMERF. What, your 1, 2, 3, where would you put those?
Commissioner, I would put the IMERF first. And I would say that I want to talk about, we could use $135 million in lots of areas of the county, for sure. But what we're talking about is actually a $35 million investment by the county spread out over a long period of time. And the $100 million is a private investment that we're not going to get otherwise. There's urgency to this project. The production tax credit that will expire if we don't start construction by 2024, that makes this project happen. Without that, it's not going to happen. So I think there's urgency to put this project number one, and the long-term benefits of this project, to be able to extend the life of the landfill by 30 years is huge. So even though we won't see that in our lifetime, our children and grandchildren would appreciate us making a wise move to protect this resource. I would put the leachate pipeline second. That is an economic development project. It's not just for the landfill leachate. You know, the landfill leachate part was kind of an offshoot, but it's to facilitate economic development in Goshen. This project will also help economic development in Goshen by having jobs there, having materials available. I could see other, spin-off industries being able to build in those underdeveloped portions in Goshen. We are moving as fast as we can on the Goshen pipeline project. We're currently in a little bit of a disagreement with the city of Springfield about whether or not it's an outright use in land use code. As soon as we can get that cleared up, we will be moving forward through the elected bodies to be able to approve the land use action that needs to happen on that project. And then I would put the Glenwood Transfer Station third. And the reason being is, again, I'm not convinced that we should be relocating the Glenwood Transfer Station. It's centrally located. People love that facility. And it functions fine. I mean, there are improvements that need to be made, and I think we can do those, incrementally over time to keep that facility sustainable. But I think we need to go through a process that involves the public to find out if they really want to move the Glenwood Transfer Station out to the outskirts of the community.
So the 11.2 million is our annual operating range, and that is solely based off tipping fee increases?
Correct.
So that has nothing to do with the plastic market. If the market tanks, we're still making 11.2. If there is no recycling market and we're recycling plastic, it goes to short. I mean, what do you do with that?
We're paying bulk handling systems for a processing cost. If they can't market the plastics, that's their challenge. They'll also be paying us a host fee for citing this recycling facility on our property. We did this project for sorting the garbage. They've added to that with a recycling line, which is a huge benefit for the community. But that wasn't what we were asking for in the proposal. So we will bring a contract document forward that shows all the intricacies of how that financing works. But I don't see that impacting our rates if they can't market the plastics.
Gotcha. I guess that's kind of one of the concerns is, are they going to be required to run so much tonnage through this IMERF in order to pay their bills? But if we're paying their bills out of our tipping fees, I guess that takes that off the table. So the plastics and organics, as you mentioned earlier, is that our responsibility to deal with those after they come off the IMERF then?
No, Commissioner. The bulk handling systems will be running the full facility, which includes an anaerobic digester sited inside of the facility.
Okay. So what now, we'll still run yard debris that will go to Lane Forest and yard debris that'll go to Rexius. The only organics that we would have would be probably just in the garbage. That's one of the concerns is Lane Forest. They use all their yard debris for the compost that they turn around and sell us as compost. But and if they're not getting that material, then that could be
So
hard.
Commissioner, we wouldn't be competing with the local composters. We're not looking to take in more organics. We're just talking about taking the organics out of the garbage that are already in there. And then we would be able to use that compost material for cover material at the landfill. Or if we wanted to improve that to the point where we could sell that compost. Some facilities in California do that, but we're not looking to do that and be in competition with the composters. We can use that material on site.
Okay. Well, it does seem like, I mean, I love construction. I love building. Not a lot of people know this, but I started my career in the public works sector in the sanitation in Junction City. So I know quite a bit about it. And, well, go on a little rant like Pat does every now and then, but it was one of the greatest jobs I've had. Drive around and wave, all the kids love you. But it's got to make sense in the end. I mean, if you know, I worked with customers daily. I happen to be a master recycler, Mr. Hurley. And they want to do what's right when you explain to them, you know, hey, this is what needs to happen. And a lot of these haulers take pride in their recycling. So that's probably why Lane County's at 53%, which is one of the higher marks. I mean, everybody wants to see this better, but it's kind of like going from an A to an A+, and that's a lot of money to go from being one of the best to a little bit better in my mind. But I think I would like to see another workshop on this. I'd like to see some more stakeholder involvement. I mean, you can only do what you can do if they don't want to be involved, but a lot of the phone calls I received, emails I received, were people that hadn't been talked to or hadn't made it to a meeting maybe. Maybe the stakeholder meeting isn't the right venue for it. Maybe we reach out and have just an IMRF stakeholder meeting or something. And I think, because the numbers that I was hearing and seeing are completely different than the numbers you guys are giving us here. You know, great presentation. I really enjoyed the tag team part of it, but I think, as Commissioner Traeger said, we could alleviate some of that pain if everybody was on the same exact page of what this is going to cost. I know there's a lot of concern about a certain tonnage having to go across, and Junction City doesn't go to Short Mountain, they go to Coffin Butte, and they're concerned about the flow control of them having to go to Short Mountain, and it doesn't make sense for them to do it. So for them to think that tells me maybe there's a communication breakdown, but it'd be something I'd like to see a little more workshopping on this myself.
Thanks, Commissioner. Then my turn. And I'm going to tell you something. This is going to be a lot easier on you than it is on me, ultimately. I got a couple of things to state. First to Mr. Herbert and Mr. Miller, thank you for coming to work on Sunday to accommodate my schedule. A week ago last Sunday, the only time we could get together was on a Sunday. You came in the middle of the day, spent a couple of hours with me, along with Ms. Quick-Warner and Ms. Edwards sitting over there. Thank you for helping arrange that. Gave me some great information, some hands-on information that I would simply not have been able to get had I not been able to visit you on Sunday. Then the second thing I'm going to say is kind of tongue-in-cheek, and maybe it's one of my rants. I don't know, Commissioner. Home Depot, what?
You're a Jerry's guy. I should have thought about that.
So in it.
So you're talking about publicly traded and multinational corporations versus local corporations. We got Home Depot, we got Jerry's. Okay, all right. That was my rant. Then the third thing is history. If I only had my way, things would be a lot better around here. If I had my way back in 1997, that leachate line would have been built. We wouldn't be talking about it today. But the city council outnumbered me. I was in the minority on this account. We did not build a leachate line. So we're still talking about that. If I'd had my way, the medical center, Sacred Heart Medical Center, would be on Chad Drive today, not in Springfield. We wouldn't be worried about them closing their university district. But I didn't get my way then either. The Eugene City Council, I was in the minority that tried to keep Sacred Heart in Eugene. So on this, take that as a lesson. My way is the right way. And you may not know it for 20 years, but that was way tongue-in-cheek. You know, this morning we had testimony, a lot of testimony from people I know, some people I've known for a lot of years, and people that I trust. People that I would trust to hand my wallet to and say, bring it back next week. I trust it's going to be exactly the same as I handed it to you, who are on different sides of this, you know? That's just the way it is. That's the way we have to deal with things as policymakers, as elected officials. Sometimes our friends want us to do different things, and some of our friends are going to be less happy at the end of the day with us than others of our friends. So bearing that in mind, we have to be as deliberative as possible. And I think that a quick question I have regarding fees is I pay $27 a month, something like that. $81, which tells you what the size my can is. It's I think it's a 30-gallon can. I used to have bi-weekly, now I have every week because our grandkids come over a lot, okay? But, so I used to pay less. But so on my $27 a month, are you saying, based on the slide that I'm looking at, that I'm going to be paying $55 to $70 a year more?
No, Chair.
70 cents a year more,
It would
excuse
be
me?
closer to $30 a year based on, now, they may increase the rate further based on their personnel costs and fuel costs and things like that. But for our impact with the tipping fee increase, we are looking at 4 years from now, paying close to $38.
It'll incrementally go up to about 10% more than I'm paying right now at $27-ish. That's roughly, okay, that's good to know, a little bit.
It'd go from $27 a month to $30 a month over 4 years.
27 a month to $30 a month over 4 years.
Over 4 years if nothing else happens to your rate.
Roughly 10% based upon this action alone. That's good, thank you.
Yeah, 2.2 a year, yep.
Then I have a couple of quick questions before I'm going to say what I'd like to see next. You're talking about grants to offset some of the county's costs. They're pretty speculative at this point. And you say you think we can get them, you hope we can get them. My question is always, let's pretend we're not going to get them, and that the entire $35 million falls on the county. Now, the $35 million offset by $100 million that isn't going to be there should we decide to do this 10 years from now, potentially isn't going to be there. That's all a matter of the debate. But the $35 million will be spread out among people in Lane County who throw trash in their solid waste disposal. Whether it's me, or whether it's Willamette High School, whether it's St. Vincent de Paul, whomever it is spread out among the people of Lane County. That's $35 million over how many years? 8 years? Is that
We'll have to come back with the bonding. I mean, we're looking at probably, 25 to 30-year financial plan that would.
Yeah. 25 to 30 years. That $35 million bonded over 25 to 30 years.
Along with the rate increases.
Okay, let's have more certainty when you come back to us on that, on specifically what that is. And the other thing I'd like to have a little bit of certainty on is the varying amount of rate increase for the different types of organizations. For instance, you've told me what it's going to be for me, but we should care about more than just me. And, what is it going to be for Willamette High School, for instance, which is a public entity, which is paid by us also, so that falls on us. And what is it going to be for a coffee shop on Main Street in Springfield? Or what's it going to be for a restaurant in downtown Eugene? Specifically, give us examples, the dollar amount per year that they will be paying at full build-out on this, more than they're paying today. So I'd like to see what they're paying today and what they will be paying in what did we say, 5 years?
We can do our best on that, Chair, but we aren't privy to that data. So it'll be those entities, sharing that with us,
Yeah.
or the haulers sharing that, but they haven't shared that with us to date.
Okay, well, everybody should know that that's important to me in my decision-making at this point in time as to what is it going to cost people. I can say, I think it's going to cost you this much, but I don't know, we'll tell you later. Or I don't know how much it's going to cost you, we'll tell you later. Come into this room, I got something to talk to you about. I'm not going to tell you what it is until you get here. That's not a good practice to be in. So, I'd like to have a little bit more certainty on that, because as I mentioned to Mr. Herbert and Mr. Miller, I want this to happen. I can see people driving by on the freeway and saying, I wonder what that is. I want to go see what that is. And when they find out, they'll say, why aren't we doing that in my community? You know, I mean, the long-term effects, not just the construction phase of this, and not even the 80 or so, however many jobs it creates, permanent jobs. But the long-term effect of this is going to ripple far beyond Lane County in being a beacon for what people can do. And how do you put a price on that? So the prices that we can assign, much like as we expanded Jerry's from 3,000 square feet to 300,000 square feet, we wanted to know all of the details. Don't surprise us at the next step. How much is it going to cost, and specifically for whom? So that if I have somebody step forward, if I have somebody from a small hauler step forward and say, this is going to cost me X amount that I will pass along to my customers, I'd like to know them to be telling the truth and that their number is the same number that you're giving me. And that's what I'd like to see at the next time we have a presentation from you. And do we have a date on that? Is that?
We don't.
I see November as a kind of a general.
Yeah.
We would like to move forward at the November with some proposals for fee increases, for purchasing the property, and for the contract documents.
And we've not purchased the property yet, and we've not even 100% certainly determined that is the right property, but I've seen what it looks like. I've seen where it is, and for me, it's a beacon, it's a flag. It really is. Everything looks good, except I'm not justified with the cost to the people who are going to be actually paying the $35 million ultimately that Lane County residents will be paying, and that needs to be justified to me. So that being said, I think there's one more thing, Vice Chair Trieger, before I give you the second round of the motion. Is there a motion? Nope, I've covered everything. So is it clear? Can you tell me what I asked for? I only asked for one thing.
Yes, Chair, to bring back more analysis on the impact to all types of customers, not just the residential ratepayers.
Very good. Vice Chair Trieger?
Thank you, Chair. That question of cost reminded me, that tax credit that you mentioned, because I understand the grants are speculative, but with pretty good ability to gauge the likelihood of securing them. But what is the impact? Forgive me if you said this and it's just lost me and I didn't write it down. To what degree does that tax credit reduce the $35 million liability in the end?
So, Vice Chair, the production tax credit is built into this analysis around this whole facility. So it's baked into the numbers that Bulk Handling Systems is providing of what they could invest. And so it's not in addition to what we've laid out. So, but for example, the cost of the building, we're estimating at $50 million. Because of the production tax credit and what could be categorized as part of the energy production, that brings that down to $35 million for our cost. And if we can shift that production tax credit onto the bulk handling side of the ledger, then that brings that down.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
And I did just recall the last thing that I wanted to suggest and that I'm going to ask for, and this is based on a telegraph that I sent to you earlier today, and that is, you know, when we did the rate increase for haulers, golly, what was it, 8 years ago now? Was it that long ago? And that included closings of some of the transfer sites, a pretty major overhauling what we did. We brought in the haulers and had them help us with the final decision on that. Really, how are you going to involve the haulers between now and the next time you make a presentation to us to help them either justify or rectify what it is that their concerns are? How are you going to do that?
Sure, I would propose that we have another stakeholder meeting as we have one scheduled in I think it's in the next couple of weeks, and we can have that and invite them in and we can go through in more detail on the financing. I don't think we're going to get the haulers to support this. It's a rate increase that they're going to have to pass to their customers, and there's a significant financial interest, again, by Sanapak Waste Connections in making sure this facility doesn't get constructed.
Then not getting them to support it is probably a long shot, as it would be if I were felt like I was bearing the burden of it, but getting them to agree that you're telling the truth. You know, that the data that you're giving us is factual, that it's not in contradiction with the data that they could provide. And I understand you can look at a field of data and pick out what is the most important to you and make your case the strongest. But, you know, find a way to have what you say agree with what they say. And that includes not just the haulers, but we also have another contractor, which is EPUD, right, who has the methane capture facility at Short Mountain. And I know that EPUD has concerns because the methane capture facility is, and potentially will be, not an insignificant part of their business model. And so how are we going to justify with EPUD how that's going to be as winning a proposal for them as possible? So three things: the rates per type of user specifically, how we're going to involve the haulers, and how does it affect the current contractor on methane capture. Okay, pretty good.
Can I get a clarification? Should we come back with just the rate analysis that you're describing to present that before that menu of the sale agreement, the contract agreements, the fee increase? You know, that's kind of we are getting the yes or no. Did you want to hear the impact to all those different entities on fees before we do the rest?
We don't need a meeting to get that particular
So we could
data.
just-
So just at such time as you can present that, then that would give me a chance to go to Buck Pelroy, who I've known since before all of our kids were born, and say, hey, does this match what you're saying? And that way we can justify and make sure that everybody's reading from the same page, reading from the same data set. Okay. Very good. Anything further then from y'all? And then from anybody in the audience? I don't often throw that open, but thank you once again for coming in on Sunday. It's not something that's very, very easy to do. Ms. Mokrajewski, anything you need to add?
No.
Then I think this is the conclusion of this meeting, unless any board member looking online for Commissioner Buck, looks like we're done for today. Thanks for a great presentation, and thanks for a brilliant look at the future.
Thank you.
Chair Farr,
Ms. Jones?
we do have additional items on the agenda.
I see Alex Kyler walking up here. That must mean something. I did know that. Thank you. What I meant to say was that's all for this particular agenda item, which was 10C. And now we'll move along to item 11A, which is report on the legislative committee update. Once again, thank you to you all who are exiting the room. See you soon. So a legislative update from Ms. Mokrajewski. I'll allow you to introduce Alex Kyler, who's our Intergovernmental Relations Manager.
There he is.
I sure stopped you once again.
That's your introduction.
Thank you.
It's been a long day.
Yes, I understand. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and board members. Alex Kyler, your Intergovernmental Relations Manager. I'm here as a result of a legislative committee meeting that was held on August 31 of this year. And this is a report back. So what you've got is a packet in front of you that has information within the memo. As I think everybody recalls now, the last time I was in front of you was actually January 31, and that was when we set the final priorities for the 23 session of the Oregon Legislature. And if you recall, the way we do that is we have a document that we call our principles and priorities document. It's a very dynamic document. As we either succeed or fail at the Oregon Legislature, it gets modified. So what I'm asking for today, what the Legislative Committee hopes for, is to get an updated version of that document so that we've got direction on how to move forward, particularly into the 24 session. And really beyond. We've got some priorities here that some may be applicable for the 24 session, others may be longer-term evolution that will queue up for the 25 session. The other thing we talked about during Legislative Committee was our United Front priorities. With the return of congressionally directed spending now 3 years ago, we continually try to evolve projects that might work for congressionally directed spending, and so I'll briefly touch on those as I go through the document. Okay? Finally, at Legislative Committee, we also did do a very brief update on the outcomes of the 23 session. You may recall it was just a couple days after, I think the session adjourned sine die on June 26th. I think I was back in the office that next Monday and did just a very brief document to the board that outlined how we had done with the legislative priorities that you sent me up there with. I told folks at Legislative Committee that I've also been doing more in-depth sort of analysis of the bills that did and didn't pass out of the 23 session, but mostly those are going to staff and really trying to highlight for staff, like, here's some pertinent changes in statute, and particularly, here's where, or what the Ways and Means Committee did, and so where there are pots of money. So we've been mostly working that through the staff level, and I'm happy to share any of those documents with you if you'd like to do a deeper dive into particular areas. So I've got some for like emergency response and climate resiliency, housing, homelessness, and then like public health, mental health, and behavioral health. I still have got to do a couple more like public safety and probably a general government kind of report out as well.
And to that point, Mr. Kyler, we are the policy body and staff is the implementation body. And if staff is operating inside a policy that's been established by the board, most often in this situation, it is more appropriate that your information goes more to staff because they're the ones doing the implementation. So that is my personal take on that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. But staff does rely on your actions to get this document tuned up, and that gives staff as much freedom as possible. And I continue to believe that, some of the best work that we ever did get done here was sort of switching from me coming in front of you every couple weeks with like asking for permission to lobby a bill or an amendment a certain way, and we'd never get through those lists. So having that principles and priorities document has really proved to be functional.
Your ability to be a gazelle in the legislature is very powerful.
Thanks. Thank you. So I'm going to get right to the, in the memo on page 3 begins a discussion of what the legislative committee is seeking for in terms of new priorities. They're highlighted in yellow in your document, and I did want to bring to your attention at the very bottom of page 3, there were 3 items that were raised after the meeting by staff. So I have taken the liberty of putting those into the document that would be part of your order. If you decide after discussion that you really don't want those in there, then we'll just have to amend the order to recognize that those were not actually discussed during the legislative committee meeting. So to go through what was discussed at the legislative committee meeting, particularly the first one is to seek a federal match for funding at the Bear Mountain Telecommunications Tower. We have, if all goes well, if the Congress can get a bill to President Biden to sign to adopt the FY24 budget, we would have some congressionally directed funding in there to provide for the Bear Mountain Tower replacement. But part of that is that we would need some matching funds, about $900,000 is what I understand. So I added that here because there's a possibility that we could manage to get that directed from the Oregon legislature for that particular project. And I, would love to be able to pursue that during the 24 session. The other one that, the others that we discussed, seek funding for establishing long-term policy collaborations with the University of Oregon. Mr. Chair, you'll recall this is what we call the LaWanda Manning Fellowship, and it was something that we've been working on ever since the passing of LaWanda Manning. And the U of O has been a really super partner on this project and really has envisioned a way for them to be able to set up the framework to have fellowship seats available over at the U of O. We would need to be able to find the funding to help stand that up. Obviously, we did a work session last week on the Community Corrections Act, so I just emphasized it in this document. When we had legislative committee, it was obviously before that conversation, but clearly we've got some needs there in terms of trying to bring those dollars up. There's been a couple of different ballot measures and elections issues that have arisen over the last couple of months. So the clerk asked for a few changes to elections law. I'm not sure we'll be able to get those done in 24, but essentially timing of recall, making sure that voters understand certain things about local elections, like whether it's going to amend the charter or be an ordinance, would align with state law, where when you vote on something, there's mandatory language that says this amends the state constitution, as well as aligning local measures with state measures in terms of making sure the voter understands if there's fiscal impacts to a local measure. So those are the three things that the clerk asked for. We continue to want to find a dedicated source of funding for mobile crisis intervention team services. We had a very robust conversation about the 988 phone line, crisis phone line, and how that could be funded. There's not any money for mobile crisis. Maybe a little bit will bleed over into mobile crisis, but not enough for 24/7, 365 across the state of Oregon. So the legislature is still going to have to find a way to fund those services comprehensively. We continue to deal with some issues around special districts in Oregon, in Lane County, that aren't being really all that able to provide adequate services to their customers. There's a possible solution in looking at converting some of those special districts into a county service district. And one of the things that I was contemplating was if we could just have one county service district that provided, for example, wastewater services in non-contiguous areas. I think there's a statutory change that would have to happen to do that, but I'm still looking through those statutes. But I wanted to include it just in the off chance that I'm pretty sure that there would have to be a statutory change in that chapter. We're looking to do some additional transparency work around how municipal utilities that are particularly like EWEB or the Springfield Utility Board, how they collect certain dollars and make sure that the impacted taxing districts are aware of what those dollar amounts are. This next bullet, support Measure 110 reform efforts. I realize that's a very broad statement. At the time that the legislative committee met, I think they may have, the proponents of Measure 110 reform may have submitted their documentation for a couple ballot measures to the Secretary of State's office, but I'm not sure they had by then or not. At any rate, we talked a little bit about about ballot measure 110 in legislative committee. There is now on the Secretary of State's website a very detailed 2 ballot measures that have been filed by proponents of reform for Measure 110. If you want, I'm happy to come back prior to the 24th session with a little bit more detail on what reform means. But what I'm really seeing the opportunity for the Measure 110 conversation, which is assuredly going to happen during the 24th session, is that we may be able to piggyback some language onto that effort that would be functional for things like our stabilization center. And so that's really what, you know, I think the county's, one of the county's priorities in looking at reform would be. The other one is, as you recall from our conversations around the Community Corrections Act, Measure 110 has been the cause of a huge decline in population. So it's had serious implications for Community Corrections Act funding. The ballot measures that are on the Secretary of State's website would fix that. It would, by recriminalizing possession and also recriminalizing some of the property crime statutes as well. So we would have, I think we would be much better off, but it is another area that we could get into in terms of what does ballot measure 110 reform really mean. And then speaking of stabilization centers, I think we're still continuing to really have to find a way to provide explicit authority for a first responder like a Cahoots or Portland Street Response to actually transport a person to someplace other than a hospital. So, and police agencies as well need to have, they've got some explicit authority to transport, but not to a stabilization center. So that's an issue that I think we need to continue to work on. Now, in terms of the 3 things that came up after the committee meeting, the first one is address the outcomes of Tyler versus Hennepin County. That was a Supreme Court decision that was made earlier this year. You may recall reading about it, but it was brought by a woman against Hennepin County, Minnesota. There was a woman whose property was foreclosed for non-payment of taxes. She owed, or I think the value of the home was like $25,000. And she argued that the county, when it sold her home, should have reimbursed her the $25,000 of the valuation of the home. And she prevailed, or the case advanced all the way to the Supreme Court, and she did prevail. So there's a number of states that actually have already, even before that case, had figured out how to provide a value back to a person whose home is foreclosed on or not. But at least their state statutes did address that whole procedure. Oregon is one of, I believe, 8 or 9 states that it's essentially silent. And so we've already seen some inquiries and invoices for finances to be returned to folks whose property was foreclosed upon in our county, as well as several other counties in the state of Oregon. And so this has gotten some urgency. The Association of Oregon Counties is working on it. And so it came up after the meeting. And essentially, we need to establish Oregon law for claim timeframes. How soon or late can somebody file after a foreclosure? And then how those distributions would occur. Second one, seek a dedicated funding source for maintaining historic covered bridges that are no longer eligible for state highway funding due to their off-system status. We've got the most covered bridges in any county, I believe, west of the Mississippi in Lane County. Not all of those are on the road system, and so they're ineligible for state highway fund dollars. And this is the challenge, is that those bridges need to be maintained, and Public Works has been having a difficult time trying to figure out how to ensure those are paid for. So there's talk of a transportation funding package in 25. That may be something that we're able to accomplish in 25. I'm not exactly sure we'd get to anything in the 24 session. And then the third one, seek weapons restrictions in public buildings that are healthcare settings. This arose from a presentation to the Board of County Commissioners last week by Director Gray, where she talked about some of the experiences that have recently occurred in some of the healthcare settings. And she did indicate to the board that council was looking into that. I have not had a conversation with council, but I sort of dove into the statutes, and there is authority for a hospital to regulate the presence of weapons, but it says hospital, which is defined in Oregon statute. So the kinds of clinics that we operate are a little bit different, and we would need to have some kind of adjustment to statute to address that. So those are the state priorities. We pivoted to a discussion at the federal level, and for the most part, focused on the projects that we would like to see funded, but also spoke about a bill that I had seen and shared with staff. It came from a national association, HR 4851. We don't expect this bill to advance, but it's really got some good language in it about how to reform federal pay structures and grant programs to help lift up stabilization centers. And we don't have, I think there's 26 or so co-sponsors on the measure right now, but none from Oregon. And so by taking this action, I think it'll give us the green light to seek Representative Hoyle or other members of the Oregon Congressional District to see if they would sign on to that measure. Continuing to figure out how to pay for local emergency management capacity, particularly an emergency manager and a deputy emergency manager. I've had kind of an idea to see if there are ways. The federal government already passes through bond revenue to the states through something called private activity bonding. And I think this would be a good conversation to have. Bonding is not normally used for ongoing expenses, so that's the caveat. It's mostly for like capital construction. But I think that given the experience of the federal government with local capacity, for example, in Maui during the fires this year, and even in other parts of the country, maybe there's some appetite for how to ensure that local governments are better able to respond to emergencies. So in terms of, oh, and then we talked briefly about wildfire prevention at a landscape level. I just think I think what I've shared with Legislative Committee is just this constant cycle, at least over the last 3 years now, of wildfires, smoky communities, all the different impacts of that, deserves us to be able to lift that conversation up at the federal level during our United Front trip. And then the other projects are more WRDA, that's a Water Resource Development Act, feasibility study for Willamette River revetment repairs, and then the other funding, medically assisted treatment facilities for youth and adults in custody. This is an issue that was brought to my attention through two of the proposals that we were looking at the opioid settlement dollars for, and I just thought that these kinds of projects might fit well into the federal milieu. The IMERF, as you heard just recently about how we're trying to find dollars for that, so I've listed it here. Somewhat related to landfill, an interchange area management plan for the Dillard Road overpass. We continue to, trucks that coming up from the south can exit to the Short Mountain landfill directly, but coming down from the north, they've got to go through the Highway 58 interchange. When we've gone to cities recently as part of some of the work that we're doing in the policy team to really share resources and information with our local cities, a couple of projects have come up, one in Coburg and one in Florence. And they seem like they would possibly fit for some federal investment. And then continuing to talk about particularly the local roads, the local access roads in Blue River. Those are not owned by the county, those roads. They are the responsibility of the property owners. And the concern is that we really haven't identified a funding source for the repair of those kinds of roads up in Blue River. And then finally, the railroad crossing at Green Hill Road I added because the Port of Coos Bay has just submitted their second, what do we call it, the mega grant that is a very large infrastructure grant. They did not get an award in the first round, but they've applied for the second round. If that grant is successful, I continue to predict that we may have some challenges with that crossing at Green Hill Road, which would have impacts for those coming from the west and using the Eugene Airport. So that's the list of projects thus far. It may be that with our consultation with our lobbyist in DC, they say, well, some of those projects there is no regular pot of money for, so they won't work, but I wanted to at least have them on the list for as we begin to evolve the next trip to Washington, DC. So I think I'll stop there. There's an order that you have, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take any questions, and again, I took the liberty of including in the order those 3 items that came up after the meeting, and if those are not okay with you, we'll have to make an amendment on the fly there.
Thank you, Mr. Kyler. You're talking about Order 2309-2607, which is before us. I'll look to the board for discussion, questions, comments prior to looking to Vice Chair Trieger for a motion. And I'm looking online. Nothing from Commissioner Buck, nothing from around. Thorough report, Mr. Kyler. Commissioner Senega.
I was just curious where the Farm Cafe bill fits on here.
Okay, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Senega. So when you look at Attachment A, we've got it in there somewhere.
Okay, I trust
I'm sure we do. I believe it's under Public Works. Yeah, page 9. So we would continue to support reform to Oregon's land use laws, which allow for farm-to-table operations on ag lands.
Perfect. I just didn't scroll far enough. Thank you.
So, you know, we could lift that up as an actual priority rather than a principle. I think we've had that discussion before about, you know, the sort of the difference in where I try to really focus is on things that have impacts to our operations rather than sort of more community policy work. I will say that I was really pretty hopeful. You know, and you came up and testified, Commissioner, and that was a good hearing. That was right before the Senate sort of imploded, and our sponsor never came back to the building. So, you know, that sort of dashed our hopes there. But there's still people who paid a lot of attention to that, and you know, I've said this to the board before. Sometimes this takes 3-4 sessions before you finally get, and it's just persistence that gets us there.
So without anything, without a major tweak, you could move that onto the priority list and still accommodate the motion that Vice Chair Trigger may be making? Is that what you're suggesting? Or do we need to be more specific about that?
I'm fine with it where it is.
Okay.
Really. I mean, I was
Yeah.
suggesting, you know, we could bring it up to a priority.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it's very clear right where it sits, and I think it's fine.
And we're confident then that you'll receive attention from this Board of Commissioners as we move forward. I think we all like it. You know, I think we all like agritourism in Lane County, and it's a major part of what we do. And who doesn't want to go out in the country and be able to have a hamburger that was grown right there where you're eating it? That's not the right example.
Mr. Chair, I think, frankly, what I would love to see is if we would have the Oregon Farm Bureau or some kind of local food advocacy or Friends of Family Farms or somebody else sort of become the champion of that effort, and we would play a quarterbacking role.
How about 2 commissioners who used to work for Food for Lake County?
That
Have that. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions, but to that, I would also just say, I think it's perfect where it is being in the principles, because that's broad enough. Going into the short session, it's unlikely anybody would introduce a bill for us to lobby on that topic. But in preparation for 25, I love the idea of identifying some community entities that might want to really kind of lead that charge. Eugene's Table, I wonder, might be, they're not explicitly Eugene, but they've got some pretty good organizing behind them as part of the chamber and onward, as one example. So I'm happy to chat with you and sort of brainstorm who are some folks you could reach out to see who wants to take the advocacy charge, and then we can support it in the, and hopefully find a bill champion in the legislature. You just said something that made me think it's always a good reminder that we try to focus on things that impact county operations. So I'm just going to flag this. It's not a true concern because we talk about it a lot, and I know you, but the Measure 110 reforms, that we are clear that what we're supporting are reforms that impact county operations. And so, for instance, things about the funding distribution and allocations, the qualifications of who can or cannot be part of a burn, those sort of regulatory impacts that mean we can't always, that we lost revenue, we lost resource because of how it's structured, that's a priority piece of that. So just being really thoughtful about why are we weighing in on whatever the particulars of the reform efforts might end up looking like. That's going to require more conversation for me to feel good about. It's so broad right now that
I think we're going to have a long discussion about that,
Yeah.
but let's not do that at this point in time.
right, but it's flagging that I'm happy to support it, but wanted to name that it's a little broad. The foreclosed property claims timeframe, I'm really interested in hearing more about that. And again, more granular than we need to get at here, but I'll be really curious to hear more about that, if there were different attempts at you get made whole on your equity, but maybe not necessarily the total amount, or what those different options might look like and how that would impact us. And then my question on the federal side is the language about the MAT facilities for youth and adults in custody. I just want to make sure I'm actually understanding the facility is the detention facility already. So is it actually about, are we actually talking about funding and the waiver so that we can provide those services to youth and adults in custody? Or is it actually looking to create a new physical facility for MAT services?
That's a very good question, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Trieger. So I didn't envision this being a brand-new facility, as in some separated four walls and a roof, more so a new facility that would be integrated into an existing footprint. But what I read in the documentation from both the jail staff and the SERBU staff was, at SERBU, they are physically, having to take kids off-site someplace. And the jail, really nothing in-house. So the idea would be some sort of improvement to the facility, but not a brand-new facility. It wasn't quite how I had envisioned, like not commingling, not as part of the stabilization center, something inside those respective facilities.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ready for the order, yeah.
Great, then I propose approval of Order 23-09-26-07 in the matter of adopting recommendations of the Lane County Legislative Committee.
Second?
Moved by Vice Chair Trigger and seconded by Commissioner Lovall. Order number 2309-2607. Discussion to the motion. I'm seeing none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. And Commissioner Lovall, you are, if need be, excused for your appointment. Thank you, Mr. Kyler. Excellent presentation once again. Moving down the agenda, Mr. Mokrahajski. We're going to have some commissioner announcements or not. Commissioner's announcements, looking around, look to online to Commissioner Buck. Seeing none. Seeing none. I'll just say that I spent time in San Francisco this weekend, and I'm glad I live in Eugene. But that being said, any future board assignment requests? I'm seeing none, Ms. Mokrahajski. Then can we have a review of assignments?
I don't have any.
Other than what was kind of thrown to Mr. Director Hurley, and that's his responsibility. Then we have completed our need for executive session today. Any other business before we adjourn the meeting? Board of Commissioners, we will have a meeting tomorrow. It's not a regular public meeting, so here's a little bit of information regarding that meeting. We'll not, after we adjourn the Board of County Commissioners meeting, tomorrow morning, Wednesday 27th, you'll see on the agenda that the Board of County Commissioners has a training at 9 a.m. Board trainings do happen occasionally, and they're not open to the public. Board trainings are structured and facilitated to ensure that we avoid any discussion and/or decisions of any official business. The board will convene again on Tuesday, October 10th in Harris Hall in regular session. So at my gavel, we are adjourned from regular public board meetings until October 10th, but we do have a board training tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the Commissioner Conference Room.